The worst enemy I ever had wasn't a dragon. It was my brother. But I'm jumping ahead, because that's what I do. I'm great at spoilers. Floor 100 of the tower looked like someone dropped a planet into a deep fryer and hit extra crispy. Mountains were soup. Oceans were steam. The sky had more cracks than my screen after that one time I dropped my phone in a parking garage. And right in the middle of all that destruction stood the abyssal dragon, the final guardian of Ephra. Thing was so big its body went past the horizon. Hadn't lost a fight in 100 years. Classic final boss energy. Billions were watching on satellite feeds from the last 10 countries that hadn't been erased yet. Nobody was cheering. They were just holding their breath because everyone got it. If I lost, humanity was basically done. Like, cancel all my plans done. The dragon lowered its head at me, eyes like molten gold, and then it talked. Actual talked. Voice so deep it bent the air. Said it had watched 100 years of kings and saints and heroes come and die. Yet here I was. I gave it a tired smile and said, "So you can talk." It laughed, or rumbled, same thing when you're the size of a mountain range, and told me to draw my sword. I looked down at the blade. Chipped edge, worn hilt. Nothing special. No god made it. It just outlasted everyone else who held it. My meridians were empty, not a single strand of chi left, and breathing felt like swallowing hot coffee on an empty stomach. Bad analogy. More like swallowing lava. But I gripped it tighter anyway, because what else was I going to do? Drop it and ask for a timeout? 100 years earlier, humanity had screwed up. Big time. Scientists opened Earth's first artificial wormhole, and the celebration lasted exactly 3 seconds, which is about how long it takes to regret any life choice, before a voice spoke inside every mind on the planet. Channel 99991 registered. Beginning universal ranking trial. A tower dropped out of the sky and named itself Ephra. Then the first tower break happened. An entire nation gone overnight. No warning. Then another. Then another. The tower never asked for challengers. It just erased anyone who said no. So humanity climbed. For survival. Because the alternative was cease to exist. And honestly, that's not a hard choice. I spent 43 years in that thing. I wasn't gifted. I got a C-ring talent called the one who walks the martial path. People laughed. My instructors told me to quit. But while everyone else leaned on their talent like it was a Black Friday sale on power, I trained. Through torn muscle, broken bones, hands so wrecked they needed blood-soaked cloth just to hold a sword. And one day, the impossible happened. My talent evolved. First time in history. C became B, then A, then S, then SS. The world called it a miracle. I called it refusing to be a quitter. Even after SS, I kept going. And then the system itself changed. Universal record broken. Hidden rank unlocked. SS to mythic. The system gave me a title, Sword God, and a final gift called Eyes of Apex, sight beyond illusion and deception. A blessing that would one day show me the worst betrayal of my life. But we'll get to that. Spoilers, remember? The dragon spread its wings. Black fire gathered in its throat. Mountains melting like wax candles around us. I smiled and said I only needed one strike. Then I poured every last strand of chi into the blade, and beyond that, beyond mana, beyond life itself, I gave it my soul. Dramatic? Sure, but I'd earned the right to be dramatic. The sword didn't blaze. It hummed with silence. Wind stopped. Flames died. Time itself seemed to be like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this. The dragon roared. The heavens cracked. I took one step, and the world disappeared into a single silver arc. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a crimson line opened across the dragon's throat. No hatred in its eyes when they found mine. Only admiration. It said magnificent, and its head slid off its shoulders. Which, honestly, respect. A continent-sized corpse crashed into the earth. Sunlight touched the tower floor for the first time in 100 years. The system went off. Final guardian defeated. Floor 100 cleared. Humanity conquered Ephra. Basically the victory screen from every video game I'd ever played. Except this one was real, and I couldn't just reload. I said it's over, and the sword slipped from my fingers. Knees buckled. Every drop of strength I had was in that one swing. The raid party came rushing in, some laughing, some crying, some just staring at the dragon like they couldn't believe it was actually over. One figure walked through the celebration without hurrying. Silver hair, steady footsteps. Takeda, Siwo, my younger brother. I smiled and said we'd finally kept our promise. He didn't smile back. Suddenly, I was remembering a kid no taller than my waist, hiding behind me with a wooden sword, asking what if I lose. I told him I'd stand beside him. I promised. That promise had carried us through everything. Siwu stopped a few steps away. His silver eyes moved from the dragon to me, and something in them wasn't hostility, it was distance. A silence I'd never felt between us. Then his hand drifted to his sword. I asked what he was doing. He said, quiet as anything. So even after everything, you still trust me. I told him of course. He was my brother, the only family I had left. His shoulders trembled. I thought he was crying. Instead he laughed, small, cold, empty. Said that was what he hated most. Then pain exploded through my chest. A crimson blade straight through my heart. Siwu leaned in close. Nodai. Just exhaustion. He was born with an SS-rank talent. The world called him a once-in-a-millennium genius. But everywhere he went, he heard one name, Takeda Nobunaga, the sword god. He'd spent his whole life in my shadow. I told him I never wanted that. He said that was the problem. If I'd been arrogant, he could have hated me clean. But I loved him, protected him, believed in him, and somehow that made him hate me more. He said as long as I lived, he'd always just be Takeda Nobunaga's younger brother. Then he twisted the blade. He pulled the sword free. I dropped to the ground. The celebration went on. Nobody noticed. Humanity's greatest victory had become my funeral. Talk about bad timing. A pale window appeared before my dying eyes. Vital organ destroyed. Heart pierced. Life force below 1%. Death confirmed. The system really knows how to kill a mood. I stared up at the cracked sky. Survived 100 years of war, only to die on my brother's sword. The darkness took everything. Then a voice answered from somewhere beyond. Neither male nor female. Like 1,000 universes speaking through one throat. The first condition has been fulfilled. The darkness shattered. Light from every direction. Not stars, worlds. Millions of them. And at the center, an eye the size of a galaxy. Its iris held universes. The voice asked if I, bearer of the eyes of Apex, would walk the path once more. Before I could answer, everything dissolved into white. The first thing I felt was silence. Not the silence after death. A gentle one. Cool mountain breeze, sandalwood scent, birds singing. Then steel on steel, steady, disciplined. I opened my eyes on an unfamiliar wooden ceiling. Raised my right hand. Small, soft. The calluses from 43 years of swordsmanship were gone. This was the hand of child. Like, literally a kid's hand. My fingers drifted to where Siwu's blade had gone through my heart. Nothing. No wound. No escar. Just a healthy heartbeat. The memories came back. The tower, the dragon, Siwu. The boy I'd raised, standing over me with a question I still couldn't answer. Why? No answer came. Just anger. Not because I died, but because I still didn't understand what I'd done to turn the boy I protected into the man who killed me. Then unfamiliar memories poured in through a splitting headache. A boy with a wooden sword. A stern voice saying again. A woman wiping his forehead, calling him Fanner. Mountains, pavilions on cliffs, disciples in white running through sword forms, spirit trees glowing blue. Chi, pure, abundant, alive in a way I'd never felt on earth. Lin Fan, 10 years old, only son of the sect master of the Heavenly Sword sect. 2 lives in one body, and no war between them. His memories just quietly became part of me, like downloading someone else's save file and finding it compatible. I opened the window. An ocean of mountains to the horizon. Waterfalls from cliffs that lost their base in cloud. Thousands of disciples training below. Every sword swing trailing blue chi. No skyscrapers. No highways. Just mountains, swords, and the pursuit of strength. Basically a cultivation theme park, except with more actual dying. I breathed in. Chi everywhere. Every lungful here carried enough energy to rival months of cultivation back on Earth, where chi had been so thin most raiders relied on mana instead. Here, the world itself breathed. Then a familiar blue light flickered to life. The Ephra legacy system, synchronization at 5%. It had followed me across worlds. My old talent, the one who walks the martial path, was restored as a passive legacy. Training efficiency, growth rate, endurance, all increased. The system wasn't giving my strength back. It was returning what I'd earned. Like a refund, but for suffering. The status panel came up. Strength 2, Agility 2, Constitution 1, Comprehension 9, Endurance 1. Mortal Realm, First Leaf. I laughed. I'd seen children stronger. Weak muscles, fragile bones, meridians clogged with impurities. To the cultivators here, Lin Fan probably had no future. But I'd started lower once. Like bottom of the barrel with a ladder lower. Then one line caught my eye. Bloodline status, sealed. Not dormant. Sealed. Someone had deliberately locked it away, and the elders changed the subject whenever it came up. Suspicious? Very. I opened the Avatar tab. The interface convulsed, blue bleeding into crimson. Warnings everywhere. Unknown authority detected. Previous world records found. Error. 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 Finally it stopped. Avatar classification failed. Status, unknown. For the first time, even the system couldn't define me. Which, honestly, same. Then the mountain shook. A bell started tolling across every peak, something old and heavy. Shouts rose. Enemy attack. Eastern formation breached. Protect the disciples. Smoke from the lower courtyards. Crimson flames on rooftops. Blood on the wind. Lin Fan's memories surfaced. The Blood Moon sect. A demonic sect that treated massacre as cultivation. Charming people. My second life had truly begun. With a bang. Literally. A blue light popped up before I'd taken 3 steps. Emergency legacy mission. Protect my mother. Captured by the Blood Moon sect. Failure would permanently alter the future. Rank A. I stared at it. Protect. Mother? She wasn't my mother. She belonged to Lin Fan. None of this was mine. Then a memory rose anyway. A woman brushing hair from a boy's forehead. A tall man correcting a wooden sword, stern but proud. Birthday candles. Laughter at a dinner table. They were my memories. They felt real anyway. I told myself they weren't strangers. This life was mine now. I'd already lost one family. I refused to lose another. The corridor outside had dissolved into panic. Disciples sprinted past with swords they barely knew how to hold. 2 armored guards blocked the courtyard exit. The sect master's orders were to protect me at any cost. Then a violent pressure detonated beyond the wall. Both guards turned on reflex. I took the one heartbeat they gave me and slipped past. Smoke thickened with every corridor. I broke into the outer courtyard and found him. Father stood alone amid a field of corpses, white robes soaked in blood, sword in both hands. Cuts covered nearly every inch of him. Still standing, like a mountain that had decided not to fall yet. Stubborn to the end. That was him. Across from him, a giant nearly 3 meters tall grinned with crimson-veined skin and glowing red eyes. Iron mace across one shoulder. He said this was all the great heavenly sword sect could offer. Rude. Father's grip tightened. Said as long as he drew breath, the giant wouldn't take another step. The giant vanished. Faster than any blue knight had a right to move. Steel met steel hard enough to throw a shockwave through the courtyard. Lin Fan's memories surfaced. Father, Lin Xian, had wanted to be a scholar, not a warrior. Despite never fully devoting himself to the martial path, he'd still reached the Blue Knight realm, one step from golden. And still, he was losing ground. Another collision sent him sliding back, blood spraying. The giant mocked his rusty blade. Father wiped his mouth and said one dull blade was still enough to kill a beast. They vanished into a blur of afterimages. Through the eyes of Apex, every motion resolved clean and slow. Father wasn't losing because his skill had failed. He'd already spent everything on enemies I hadn't even seen yet. The notification confirmed it. Blood Moon Sect Elder. Golden Knight rank. Father was fighting one realm above his own, which is like bringing a pocket knife to a tank fight. The giant's aura erupted. Disciples collapsed from the pressure. It roared and brought the mace down in a final arc. Father didn't dodge. He closed his eyes, murmured about this being the limit of his sword. Blue light gathered around the blade. Sword intent, pure and absolute. An old elder dropped to his knees. The sect master's forbidden art. Father raised the blade. Heavenly sword sect's ultimate art. Azura's wrath. The mountain shook. Blue sword chi spiraled around him. His grip never wavered. A single slash split heaven and earth. The giant raised his mace too late. The sword passed clean through. His entire arm, mace and all, hit the ground in an explosion of blood. The disciples erupted. Hope came back into the courtyard. I wanted to feel it. But the eyes of Apex never left the battlefield, and something still felt wrong. Father's sword slipped from his fingers. Knees buckled. Someone shouted for a healer. A guard whispered it was over. I said no, it wasn't over. Cold crawled down my spine. Pain lanced through both eyes. Blue veins spread from my temples. The world changed. Every living person wrapped in visible threads of chi. Every aura laid bare. Except one. Hidden. Silent. Standing directly behind my father's shadow. A blade of pure black slid free of empty air. An assassin. I screamed, "Father." Every head turned. I shouted there was someone behind him. A guard grabbed my shoulder, told me to calm down. Nobody moved. To every eye but mine, there was nothing behind him at all. Not again. Not another family I couldn't protect. Father turned. Our eyes met. Mine glowing faint blue, my face white with terror. He hesitated. Then he trusted me. Without asking why, he twisted on instinct. One heartbeat too late. The black blade flashed once. Blood scattered like rain across the stone. Silence swallowed the courtyard. Something rolled across the ground and came to rest against my foot. Father's eyes were still open, still gentle, still looking toward me, as though even now he needed to make sure his son was safe. The sword slipped from my hand. I tried to say, "Father." The world went completely, utterly silent. I don't know how long I knelt there before the system spoke. Warning. Host mental state critical. Extreme emotional instability. Chi flow unstable. Host advised to calm down. Calm down. A laugh tore out of me. My father's body lay in front of me. My mother was still a prisoner, and this thing in my skull across two lives wanted me to calm down. Yeah, sure. Let me just meditate on that for a sec. The air went heavy. Every disciple within 30 meters turned pale, staring at a 10-year-old boy. Someone whispered the pressure was coming from the young master. Something older than rage woke behind my eyes. Blood streaked my fingers when I pressed them to my face. The eyes of Apex deepened, gold cracks spreading through the blue. The assassin went still. Asked what those eyes were. It wasn't my cultivation that rattled him. It was the sense that whatever he'd hidden his whole life had just been seen by a child. A darker notification unfolded. Synchronization threshold achieved. Emergency authority activated. Dragon Slayer art compatible. Host condition insufficient. Recommendation do not use. Probability of permanent disability 99.97%. I read it once. Didn't need twice. 2% chance of not being permanently disabled? I'll take those odds. My eyes rose to the man who'd taken my father. The assassin gripped his blade. A child? I was going to fight him? I bent down, wrapped my fingers around a dead man's sword, and lowered myself into a stance I'd practiced 1,000,000 times across 2 lifetimes. The wind died. The assassin's smile faded. Took a step back. Asked who I was. I raised a sword. It trembled. This body had no business bearing what was about to move through it. Dragon Slayer. First verse. The heavens rumbled. One step. A line through the air faster than thought. A crimson seam opened across the assassin's arm. He staggered back 20 meters. A purple Night Realm master, wounded by a 10-year-old. Every meridian in my arm felt like molten iron. The system warned, meridian damage 38%, muscle fibers torn, bone fractures detected. Great. Just great. The assassin demanded to know who taught me. I said nothing. My father lay behind me. He vanished, reappeared above me, blades swinging from my throat. I closed my eyes and gave everything I had left. Dragon Slayer. Final verse. Ancient pressure rolled off the peaks. The assassin's face went bloodless. Said this sword intent couldn't exist. I stepped forward. One line through the air. Silence. He stood there, blade raised, and laughed. That's it. Then a silver line opened across his whole body. Impossible. He came apart without a sound. Silver dust, carried off by the wind. Then the cost came due. My right arm, muscle torn from shoulder to fingertip, bone showing through skin. The system threw up a critical warning. Right arm destroyed. Host entering collapse. Darkness crept in. Then one more window. Emergency mission. Objective incomplete. Protect your mother. Target alive. Location detected. That was enough. I forced myself upright. Couldn't fall yet. Every step sent agony through me. Blood marked the stone behind me. The eyes of Apex turned walls transparent until one faint blue light remained, deep beneath the main hall. An old physician said my injuries were fatal. I said move, and something in my eyes made him step aside. The main hall's roof had half collapsed. The eyes of Apex caught a hidden thread of chi beneath the floor. Lin Fan's memories answered. An emergency refuge for the sect master's family, known only to father, mother, and me. I pressed my hand to the stone. A staircase opened into cold air. I went down. Broken chains on the floor. The prison door forced open. Then Fanner. She stood at the corridor's end, robes torn, one wrist trailing a broken shackle. Her eyes went wide, horror that had nothing to do with her captors. She started running toward me, then stopped, her gaze hitting the ruin of my arm. Asked what happened. I tried to smile. Couldn't. For the first time since I'd faced dragons and death without a tear, I felt them come. Said I was sorry. Couldn't save him. Father. He's... She went still. Then a single tear slid down her cheek as she looked up at the broken ceiling, searching for a man who wasn't coming back. Called him a fool. Said he promised they'd grow old together. She wrapped both arms around me. My son, you came back. That's enough. That was the last thing I heard. Whatever I'd been running on gave out. The last thing I felt before the dark took me was warmth, a mother's arms closing around what was left of me. Darkness for a long time. No body, no pain. Then once, far away, a voice. Mother, asking me to wake up. The smell of medicine reached me next. Warm sunlight, wind bells outside a paper window. My eyes opened on the same wooden ceiling. When I tried to lift my right arm, nothing happened. The whole thing was wrapped from shoulder to fingertip in bandages, a wooden splint holding shattered bones in place. Dragon Slayer had taken its price in full. I murmured that I'd survived. Mother stirred beside the bed. She'd fallen asleep sitting there, dark circles under both eyes. The moment she saw I was awake, her eyes filled. She told me not to move. I asked how long. 3 days, she said. 3 whole days. Neither of us said Father's name. She smoothed the blanket over me. Before she could turn, I caught her sleeve. Said I was sorry. She laid her hand on my head. Said I had nothing to apologize for. If anyone should, it was her. She couldn't protect my father. I shook my head. He protected all of us. Fulfilled his duty until his last breath. She managed something close to a smile through her tears. Said I sounded just like him. After she left, my eyes drifted to the window. White banners on every rooftop. One for every disciple who died defending the mountain. And at the center, taller than the rest, one banner alone. Father's. His funeral had already come and gone while I lay unconscious. The whole sect was grieving. I said quietly to the mountains that I wouldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. I'd rebuild this sect. Protect Mother. Find everyone responsible. The Blood Moon sect and whatever force stood behind them. Cut them all down, no matter how long it took. A blue window appeared. Emergency mission completed. Protect your mother. Success. Synchronization went from 5 to 10%. A warm emerald light bloomed above the blanket, condensing into a crystal vial. Liquid jade shimmered inside. The system called it a divine totem of healing. Restored all injuries, repaired meridians, regenerated bones. But the last line stopped me. Could not revive the dead. No miracle here could undo what a hidden blade had done. Death was the one debt nothing could pay back. I said if only I'd had this sooner, and let the thought go. Another notification. Dragon Slayer art recovered. Only the first verse accessible. The rest locked behind higher synchronization. The memories came with it. A sword cleaving through black cloud, mountains splitting under a single swing. Only the first verse had come back. That was enough. I'd climbed this mountain before. One more tab. Avatar information, updating. The screen convulsed. The same warning crawled back. Unknown authority detected. Previous world records found. Error, error, error. Then it settled. Avatar, Cremidos. Realm, mortal, first leaf. Potential, infinite. Evolution status, upgradable. Infinite potential wasn't an answer. It was a door the system wasn't ready to open. Whatever Cremidos was, it sat behind something even the system didn't have authority over. I let the window close and turned the vial in my remaining good hand. Far beyond the mountain, beyond the sky. Something ancient opened its eyes in a place with no name. It had noticed me. I didn't know that yet. I only knew my arm wasn't going to heal itself, and I had a promise to keep. I broke the seal. The scent was like spring rain over an untouched forest. I drank it in one motion and let whatever came next come. The liquid touched my tongue and melted away. Nothing for one heartbeat. Then my heart slammed, and emerald light burst from my body in a blinding wave. Muscles convulsed like invisible hands tearing me apart and stitching me back together. Every broken meridian lit up white-hot before the light sealed them shut, one by one. Bone ground against bone. New flesh spread like something growing in fast motion. Severed nerves woke up again. It hurt more than almost anything I could remember. Compared to the tower, it was still nothing. Outside, an elder murmured the aura wasn't she. It was something far older. By sunset, the light went still. I flexed my fingers, wrist, shoulder. Nothing. Not even the memory of pain. I threw a single punch. The air split clean down the middle. For the first time since waking in this body, it finally belonged to me. The days passed in strange peace. The sect rebuilt around its grief. Every morning before sunrise, I stood in Father's old courtyard with a wooden sword. Basic forms. 1 swing. 10. 100. 1,000. Each identical. Each exact. Disciples slowed to watch. By the third day, elders lingered. The first elder asked who taught me this. I said my father. He smiled faintly and said whatever path I'd found, don't lose it. He hadn't believed me. Even Father hadn't reached this precision. Not because the forms were complicated, but because every wasted motion had been cut out by someone who understood that true swordsmanship was about ending a fight with the smallest possible movement. On the 4th morning, Mother came with a folded set of robes. Deep navy, silver embroidery, a golden sword beneath a griffin. The crest of Baskerville Academy. She opened a wooden box. Inside sat a plain jade pendant. No chi, no aura, and Lin Fan's memories rose to meet it. Father had carried it every time he left the sect. She settled it around my neck. Beneath it, a second thing, a bracelet of dull, scrap metal, tarnished black, 3 links crudely reforged. Looked like something dug from a battlefield. Mother said no appraiser could tell her anything about it. No chi, no aura. But he'd wrapped it separately, like it mattered more than the things that looked like they should. I took it. The instant it touched my skin, I reached for Lin Fan's memories. Nothing answered. No name. No wodems. Whatever this was, it hadn't come from this life. I slid it onto my wrist. Mother asked if I'd wanted to become as strong as him. I said yes. She said don't stay here. We'd protect the sect. There were places I'd never seen. Heights Father never reached. Go. Learn. Grow. Come back as someone no one could threaten. The next morning, the sect gates opened. Hundreds of disciples in silent rows. As the carriage rolled forward, every head bowed to the son of the man who'd given everything. I looked back once. White banners above the mountain. I bowed deeply and said when I returned, the heavenly sword sect would stand among the strongest again. Lin Fan's memories unspooled the world as the road unwound. For continents making up Dementia. The The sect belonged to Statera Kingdom on Kronos. Our destination, Trigatia, the capital. Baskerville Academy, a place that had produced sword saints, spear kings, grand mages, and monarchs, and its share of monsters, including at least one who would one day try to burn the world down. I already knew which name to watch for. This year wouldn't be wasted. This time I knew what was coming, and I intended to be the one who rewrote it. The academy rose ahead of the carriage. Towering white stone walls engraved with centuries of sword marks. Buildings older than the kingdom itself. Training arenas large enough to swallow a small town. Every brick had a story. Most belonged to people whose names still meant something. Baskerville didn't work like normal schools. No fixed length of study. Freedom to train, fight, study, as long as you kept proving you deserved to stay. But every year, every student faced the same test, the legacy trial. A former headmaster's inheritance sealed inside a legacy realm. Rare techniques, legendary weapons. Tomorrow it would be mine to attempt. Tomorrow was also the entrance ceremony. I dressed in ceremonial robes, deep black, silver thread, golden crest over my chest. The campus was full of students heading toward the grand ceremony hall. For most of them, today was a dream they'd chased their whole lives. Turning a corner, a shoulder slammed into mine, and something cold and sticky splashed across my new uniform. The cheerful noise around me dropped into silence. I looked down at the stain, then up at the person who'd caused it. Kallio, young master of the Nitsuki sect, one of the 5 strongest sects in the kingdom. His lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer, students behind him laughing on cue. He said the bastard actually survived his first year. Said I didn't belong here. This academy was built for the elite, not trash like me. Told me to crawl back to whatever hole I came from. I kept my mouth shut. Len Fan's memories filled in the blanks. Kallio, young master of the Nitsuki sect, basically the trust fund kid of the cultivation world. Starting something with him would land squarely on Mother and the uncle who'd been playing dad by default. So I brushed the liquid off and kept walking, because I'm nothing if not professional about avoiding drama. Kallio stepped in front of me like he was in a movie, asked if I lost my tongue, leaned in close, whispered that my father died surrounded by worthless thugs, some pathetic way for a swordsman to go. Then asked why I didn't send my beautiful mother to, you know the rest. My hand closed around his face before my brain even filed the paperwork. The whole courtyard froze. My vision went white at the edges. Some surge of chi tore down my arm before I'd consciously decided to do anything about it. I pulled. Blood sprayed everywhere. Kallio's scream cracked through the courtyard as his cheeks split open at both corners of his mouth. Students stumbled backward like they'd just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. I didn't stop. Grabbed his collar, drove his skull into the ground. Bam, bam, bam. By the 10th strike, I'd lost count, and blood had soaked into the white stone beneath us. Kallio's body had gone limp, which I took as a sign he was done arguing. Then the pressure hit. One word, enough, and every head in the courtyard bowed on reflex like someone had just hit them with a universal look-down command. Professor Julian, academy instructor, renowned saber master, and apparently the person whose job it was to ruin my day. Sharp amber eyes settled on me. She looked at what remained of Kallio's face, then at me. Said this wasn't a training ground. Fighting was forbidden here. Groundbreaking news, really. The rage drained out of me like someone had pulled a plug. I stepped back without offering an excuse, because what was I supposed to say? He started it. She studied me, her avatar's invisible pressure brushing against mine like she was checking my ID at a bar. A second passed, then another. She said it was interesting. She couldn't see my avatar. Even with her immortal realm, First Leaf, she could barely sense it. Said it was astonishingly small. I said nothing. There wasn't exactly a version of the truth I could offer that wouldn't land me in a much bigger problem. Behind us, Kallio pushed himself up, uniform soaked in blood, lips torn badly enough that speech came out broken. He managed 1 week. Training grounds. He make me regret today. Nobody underestimated the threat. Kallio carried an immortal third leaf avatar, Chi absorption nearly 1,000 times faster than my mortal first leaf. Against him, I should have had no chance. It's like bringing a water gun to a firefight, except the firefight is also on fire. I turned and walked on toward the ceremony hall, because apparently I had places to be. By the time I arrived, thousands of students filled the largest hall I'd ever stood inside. Stone pillars carved with names of graduates whose legends had outlived them, which is a fancy way of saying they were dead, and everyone pretended to care. I found a seat near the middle. Someone took the chair beside me. When I glanced over, the noise in the room briefly stopped mattering, which is usually how you know you're in trouble. Long silver hair, catching light like woven moonlight. Yeah, I know, shut up. Flawless posture, composed expression. She didn't glance at the thousands of students around her, as if none of it were worth her attention. I didn't recognize her crest, but everything about her said she was someone whose name I should have known, like showing up to a party and realizing everyone else got the dress code except you. The headmaster's remarks were short. Talent meant little without discipline. Yada yada. Administrative announcements followed, because even fantasy schools have bureaucracy. Then the student council president stepped forward with a crimson-bound scroll. She announced the entrance examination results. First in swordsmanship. First in cultivation. First in written assessment. First in combat evaluation. First in overall performance. Elia Vortexian. The hall broke into noise. Beside me, the young woman rose without a flicker of excitement, walked to the stage, accepted her medal with a simple bow, said thank you, calm, unhurried, as though excellence were simply what was expected of her, like she just picked up groceries. Then she returned to her seat like the ceremony had never involved her. After the ceremony, I caught sight of silver hair ahead, closed the distance, tried to congratulate her. No response. Tried again. Nothing. She walked on as though my words had been carried off by the wind, which is a poetic way of saying she completely ignored me. Couldn't blame her. Someone born into the Vortexian family had probably spent her whole life fielding strangers who wanted something, like being the popular kid in high school, except with more swords. By the time I reached my dormitory, the noise fell away. The ceremony, the applause, every whispered conversation about Elia Vortexian, all gone, leaving me alone with one thought. Kallio. 1 week. How was I supposed to beat someone with an immortal third leaf avatar? Today had only gone my way because he'd underestimated me. An official duel would give him no such advantage. No surprise. No hesitation. Just the overwhelming gap between our cultivations, which is a polite way of saying I was screwed. An immortal third leaf absorbed chi at a pace my mortal first leaf couldn't match. Talent decided where the road began. Effort decided how far you got. Kallio had both, which is just unfair, and I want to speak to the manager. Brute force was out. If cultivation couldn't close the gap, I needed another road. Fortunately, this wasn't my first life. Behind these ordinary eyes sat the memories of a man who'd once stood at the top of the sword. Forms built for duels. Techniques built to kill. Centuries of instinct, which sound impressive until you remember I'm currently living in a teenager's body. Most of those techniques demanded a physique this body didn't have yet. Meridians too fragile. Forcing them now would cripple me before the duel started, which would be a great look. But not everything I carried depended on cultivation. Technique, timing, distance, reading an opponent. None of that lived in a meridian. Those were skills, and skills could be sharpened through repetition, like practicing guitar, except instead of calluses you get mystical energy. I said if I couldn't become stronger, I'd become better. Strength belonged to cultivation. Being better belonged to the swordsman. I'd watched warriors who outmatched me physically lose anyway, because they let the small details rot. A misplaced step, an impatient swing, against someone who knew what to look for. Those mistakes meant everything. I grabbed the practice sword. My reflection caught in the window. A young face, nothing remarkable. No one would guess the soul behind it had once shaken kingdoms, which is probably for the best. Let them underestimate me. The battlefield was the only place truth spoke for itself, which is a dramatic way of saying I was out of options. Outside, lanterns lit the stone paths. Somewhere beyond the quiet, steel rang against steel. Someone still training after the rest of the academy had gone to rest. I turned toward the training grounds and started walking. If I meant to beat Kallio in a week, every hour had to count, which meant no sleep, no social life, and definitely no fun. The academy had changed key. Students broken into groups, all talking about the same name, Elia Vortexian. I had no interest in joining those conversations. Talent only decided where a road began, which is what I kept telling myself. I let my feet carry me through the grounds. Courtyards where students traded techniques, disciples beneath spirit trees circulating chi. Even the air smelled different, polished wood, cut grass, steel, which is basically the smell of a fancy gym. Then a sound reached me through the trees. Steel on steel. Deliberate, unhurried, precise. Curiosity pulled me down a stone path until I reached an outdoor training ground, nearly empty. At its center, a lone figure trained. Silver hair. Elia. She moved with a grace hard to put into words. Every transition flowing into the next. Every step in perfect balance. It wasn't swordsmanship built to impress. It was years spent perfecting fundamentals most people never looked at twice, like watching someone fold laundry with perfect technique. I stayed and watched. The real substance sits underneath the speed and elegance, the rhythm of breath, the way chi moves through meridians, the shift of weight before a blow. Elia's foundation was excellent. Whoever trained her had done it with real care. And still, perfection is usually an illusion, like Instagram filters. On her third repetition, I found it. During the transition into the third movement, her breathing slipped out of sync with her chi circulation by a fraction of a second. A sliver of chi dispersing before it completed its cycle. Repeated 1,000 times, it would exhaust her faster and cap the technique's true potential. It wasn't a flaw in her talent or execution. It lived in the breathing method itself. Then the steel stopped. Elia lowered her blade and glanced over her shoulder, sharp sapphire eyes already locked onto me. Said I'd been watching for quite a while. If I was planning to keep at it, I might as well stop hiding. I stepped out. Said I wasn't hiding. I followed the sound of swords, which was technically true and also completely suspicious. She recognized me from the ceremony. Said I'd approached her afterward. Now I was watching her train. Looked remarkably like following her around, which I couldn't really argue with. I laughed. Said she'd misunderstood. She crossed her arms. Asked what I'd been looking at. I said her sword. She had excellent foundation, stable footwork, disciplined posture, exceptional control. Most cultivators her age wasted movement between forms. She didn't. Those weren't the kind of compliments a fellow student offered. She asked if that was all. I said no. I'd also noticed a flaw. The word changed the air. Her grip tightened. She trained since childhood under the kingdom's most renowned swordsman. Nobody her age had ever claimed to find something wrong with her form, and here I was, random dude, dropping bombs. She asked if I understood the sword well enough to critique someone else's. I said enough to recognize what I saw. The breathing fell out of rhythm during the third transition. She said no, it didn't. I said it did. Her method had been taught by Elder Seraph personally. I said I was sure it had, which was me being polite about it. She asked if I was saying Elder Seraph made a mistake. I said there was a difference between a mistake and a limitation. Her breathing method wasn't wrong. It simply didn't harmonize with how she naturally moved chi. She asked if I'd reached that conclusion after a few minutes of watching. I said I'd seen enough. She told me to prove it. Ran through the sequence again. I said she'd made the same mistake 3 times. I twitched, which I took as a sign she was listening. I stepped closer. First inhale fine, second too. But before the third strike, her shoulders rose. Breath deeper than needed, interrupting flow through her upper meridians. The loss was small. It compounded like interest on a credit card you forgot about. She said she didn't believe me. I said I'd show her. Picked up a wooden practice sword. Asked if she used the third bloom sword art. Her eyes widened. How did I know? The final flourish gave it away. Settled into a stance. Said I'd never practiced this art. I only needed to understand the sword. I recreated the opening stance after watching it only a handful of times. No polish, none of her elegance, but efficiency in its place. Every shift of weight fed naturally into the next. Every breath matched the sword's movement exactly. By the time I reached the final stance, the training ground had gone completely silent, which is usually how you know you've done something weird. Elia's eyes had gone wide. I hadn't copied her form. I'd stripped it down to what it actually needed, like taking a fancy recipe and just cooking the damn food. I lowered the sword. Said she'd spent years polishing the branches. I simply returned to the root. Neither of us noticed the elderly instructor who'd stopped beneath the archway, watching with quiet curiosity, because of course there was an audience. She asked me to do it again. Slower. When it ended, she said she'd noticed it, the breathing. I told her the sword followed the body. The body followed the breath. If the breathing was wrong, the sword never reached its full potential. She asked what had changed. I said during the third transition, don't force the lungs to fill. Let the breath come naturally. Guide the chi through the lower meridians first. Stop controlling it. Breathe with the sword. She said that was incredibly vague. I agreed. She pointed out I was smiling, which was probably rude. She sighed, returned to center, settled into her stance. Eyes closed. Slow breath. Then she began again. The first movement flowed, as before. The second, unchanged. In the third transition, the difference happened in real time. Her shoulders didn't rise. Breathing stayed calm. Chi steadied, gathering in smooth, unbroken waves around her blade instead of scattering. She kept moving one form into the next, the rhythm becoming more natural with every repetition. The breeze began gathering around her feet, lifting fallen maple leaves into slow circles, which is the kind of thing that looks cool in movies, but in person is just leaves being annoying. She'd been standing at the threshold. This wasn't a breakthrough I'd handed her. It had been waiting for someone to clear the last obstacle. Chi surged. Stone cracked beneath her as pressure expanded and settled. Elia opened her eyes, stared at her hands. Whispered she'd broken through. Circulated chi again, smoother, denser. The bottleneck that had held her for months was gone. Fifth leaf. A smile broke across her face. She turned toward me. Asked how. I shrugged. Said she was already ready. She shook her head. Stuck for months. Elders examined her cultivation more times than she could count. None of them noticed. I said they were looking at her cultivation. I was looking at her sword. The silence between us felt different. Suspicion gone, replaced by something she didn't extend to people her age often. Respect, which is a big deal when you're the person who just got first place in everything. She said she owed me an apology. She judged me without knowing me. I said it happens. She hesitated. Said she was sorry. I cupped a hand behind my ear, didn't quite catch that. She said I hurt her. I wasn't so sure. She stamped her foot. Said I was doing this on purpose. She glared, let out an exasperated breath. Turned toward the exit, paused. Said, thank you, so quietly it barely made it past the breeze. Then she was gone. I laughed. Set the wooden sword back. So she could be honest after all, when it was convenient. An old instructor's voice came from behind the maple trees. Said he'd taught swordsmanship at Baskerville for over 30 years. Today he'd watched a student correct a flaw experienced instructors never caught. Asked who taught me to see a sword that way. The academy bell rang out, calling students toward practical sessions. The old man's smile widened. Said my real training at Baskerville was only just beginning, which is the kind of thing teachers say to sound mysterious. Students hurried from every direction toward the practice fields. Dozens of swords already clashing. For the first time since arriving, the academy's true rhythm had started, and I was already part of it, whether I liked it or not. Morning came quietly over Baskerville. I sat up on the edge of the bed. Yesterday's encounter with Elia drifted through my mind and faded. Correcting her flaw had never been the point. It had simply been impossible to ignore, like a typo in a menu. I wondered if she was still embarrassed and fought down a laugh. But there were more pressing matters. Kallio. The duel was closing in fast, and no amount of confidence changed how wide the gap between us actually was. I picked up my practice sword and left. The Easter training grounds sat nearly empty. I chose a quiet spot beneath a maple tree, set the wooden sword in front of me, and closed my eyes. Every cultivator on Dementia followed the same basic path. Sit, empty the mind, guide chi along established routes. It worked for most people. I wasn't most cultivators, which is an understatement. Back on Earth, chi, as Dementia understood it, hadn't really existed. Humanity ran on mana and talent. I've been one of the few who refused to let chi go, and that stubbornness led to the talent that changed everything. As it climbed from C to SS, the system kept handing me techniques that shouldn't have existed, like getting cheat codes for a game nobody else was playing. One stood above the rest. Cosmic wave QI circulation. Traditional cultivation demanded stillness. Cosmic wave demanded motion. Traditional cultivators gathered chi through meditation. Cosmic wave gathered it through the sword. Every swing, every step, every breath folded into cultivation itself, which is basically the opposite of how everyone else does things. I dismissed it as impossible at first. It took 10 years of proving myself wrong before every completed motion drew chi into the body before it circulated on its own. The sword itself became the channel between heaven, earth, and the person holding it. By the time I'd mastered it, its efficiency outpaced every cultivation method humanity had ever devised, which is a fancy way of saying it was broken. I wrapped my fingers around the wooden sword. This world had no shortage of extraordinary techniques, but I refused to believe any of them beat Cosmic Wave. I dropped into the most basic sword form. Nothing remarkable, the same movements every beginner learned. Underneath those plain motions, I activated the circulation pattern that had once stunned an entire world. The instant my breathing synchronized with the blade, everything changed. Chi trembled around me, then drifted toward me in thin, steady streams, following each movement, flowing into my meridians with every completed strike. It worked. Imperfectly, this body was still too weak for the complete form, but the foundation held. One swing became 10. 10 became 100, which is when you know you're committed. Hours passed. Sweat soaked through my robes. Cosmic Wave demanded continuous motion. Breaking the rhythm too early would blunt what it was meant to do. By the 6th hour, something shifted, chi accelerating past ordinary cultivation, flowing like an endless tide. The system chimed. Legacy resonance confirmed. Previously mastered technique detected. Cosmic Wave QI circulation recouvée. Rank SS. A supreme cultivation method that transforms sword practice into continuous chi circulation. I laughed quietly. Said the system had finally recognized it, like it took it long enough. Then a second notice. This technique possessed further growth potential. View evolution requirements? I blinked. It could evolve? I'd never considered Cosmic Wave might have a stage beyond SS rank, which is like finding out your favorite song has a remix. The requirements appeared. Upgrade avatar to Heaven-Reaching Realm, 1st leaf. Reach Cultivation Heaven-Reaching Realm, 5th leaf. Further conditions locked. I let out a helpless laugh. Got a very long road ahead of me. Neither requirement was anywhere close. Somehow that only sharpened my resolve. If Cosmic Wave really had another form waiting, I'd reach it the same way I'd broken past every ceiling this world claimed was fixed. I picked the training back up. 2 more hours before I lowered the sword. Every muscle burning. Then a familiar warmth spread from my dantian and surged outward. The invisible bottleneck gave way without resistance. I breathed out slowly. Mortal Realm. 3rd leaf. Nearly 8 hours after I'd sat down beneath that tree, the breakthrough had arrived. Back at the dormitory, I dropped onto the bed. Not bad. Reaching 3rd leaf in a single day was extraordinary. Ordinary meditation would have taken weeks, maybe months, which just goes to show that doing things the hard way sometimes pays off. I circulated my chi again. The difference from that morning was immediate. Every pathway wider, steadier. Every inhale pulled spiritual energy toward me on its own. The foundation was finally stabilizing. I called up the system. Synchronization at 13%. Status showed the jump. Strength 12, endurance 16. Cosmic Wave didn't just cultivate chi, it refined the body alongside it. Spirit and comprehension hadn't moved. Those weren't qualities that bent to physical repetition. Synchronization. Only 3 points higher than After Everything at the sect. Saving Mother. Recovering Dragon Slayer. Unlocking Cosmic Wave. 2 cultivation breakthroughs. 3% for all of that, which is basically the system being stingy. Raising synchronization wasn't going to be easy. The system had never rewarded meaningless motion. Every increase so far had come from reclaiming something I'd earned, or changing the shape of Len Fan's original fate. Simply training day after day wouldn't be enough. I'd have to earn it, the same way I had the first time. One more question. I opened the Avatar tab. Cremitos. Mortal, First Leaf. Potential Infinite. Evolution Status. Upgradable. I selected View Details. The screen went dark. Ancient symbols crawled across it, as though the system were digging through its own buried records. Then new text formed. Avatar Evolution Requirements. Cultivation. Mortal Realm. Fifth Leaf. Checked. Then a row of empty squares. Not words. They looked like seals, as though something had been deliberately scrubbed out of the system's own record. I asked quietly what it was hiding from me. The screen offered nothing further, which is the system's way of saying, mind your business. Whatever Cremitos was, it wasn't as simple as infinite potential. An avatar that could be upgraded. A locked evolution path with sections erased rather than hidden. A system that flinched every time I asked it a direct question about my own nature. None of it was normal. Whatever sat behind that seal would end up changing a great deal more than just my avatar. I smiled faintly, said my journey had only just started, which is the kind of thing you say when you don't know what else to say. Outside, the evening bell rolled across Baskerville, and somewhere beyond the academy walls, someone had already begun quietly asking about the student who'd corrected Elia Vortexion's swordsmanship with nothing more than a glance. 5 days until the duel. Voices found me in the courtyard. Kallio had broken through again. Fifth Leaf. Laughter from the group. I kept walking. Against Kallio's sixth leaf, the gap was enormous. One real clash, one mistake, and the fight was over. I drew my sword. If cultivation couldn't close the distance, everything else would have to sharpen. Relentless repetition. Again, again, again. Then the world skipped a heartbeat. Air became unbearably heavy, reality briefly forgetting how to hold its shape. Students looked up. Instructors rose with grave expressions. Something descended from the sky, a human shape wrapped in silver mist, face blurred, every movement distorting chi. An avatar. Enough pressure to smother a battlefield, which is a dramatic way of saying it felt like someone had turned up the gravity. A rough, ancient voice. How did you do that? I stared. The voice exploded. Boy, have you gone deaf? I cupped my fists, apologized. Said if his intentions were hostile, Baskerville's formations would have dealt with him, which was me stalling because I had no idea what to say. Pressure slammed down, driving my knees into the ground. Stone cracked. Felt like a mountain on my shoulders, which is probably what it felt like. The voice chuckled. The son of the fallen sword sect still dared answer back. I gritted my teeth, refused to lower my head. The pressure lifted. The voice laughed, disliked spineless children. The patriarch of the Vortexian family, one of the strongest swordsmen in the kingdom, and apparently the kind of person who tests people by crushing them with invisible force. He said he came because of his daughter. Elia had practiced their sword art for 7 years. Nobody had ever found a flaw in her breathing. Yet I corrected it in less than a minute. The method I'd suggested, even he found it superior. For the patriarch to admit that was almost unthinkable, which is a fancy way of saying I'd done something impressive. He asked who taught me. I said I couldn't answer. He laughed, said every genius kept secrets, wouldn't force it, then raised a finger. Draw my sword. Attack. Everything I had. I drew my blade. If this was a test, no point holding back. Chi surged, I vanished, blade flashing toward the avatar's neck. The patriarch didn't move. Raised one finger. My sword stopped dead against his fingertip. Cold sweat ran down my back. He said, excellent foundation. My body was too weak to support it yet. A flick sent invisible force through me, sliding me backward dozens of meters. Gentle by his standards, which is terrifying to think about. He said I had talent. What I lacked was time. A streak of light shot toward me. I caught it. A map. He'd heard I was fighting an arrogant child soon. Disliked arrogant children. The map led to hidden treasure. Reach it in 5 days. 1,200 mortal cultivation pills as reward. 1,200. Most cultivators spent years scraping together enough for a single breakthrough. Whatever was inside belonged to me too. Did I accept? I said I did. The avatar dissolved. I looked at the map and smiled. Fate hadn't abandoned me. I unfolded it. The smile disappeared. Destination in crimson ink. Baskerville Academy. Magic Tower, 3rd floor. The Magic Tower held 31 floors, each exponentially worse. Even elite 3rd years struggled to survive the first. The 3rd floor was forbidden ground for ordinary students. I only had 5 days. For the first time since reincarnation, I couldn't tell whether the Patriarch intended to reward me or bury me. The Vortexian Patriarch handed me a map and told me to reach the 3rd floor of the Magic Tower in 5 days. I called him a lunatic under my breath, but I ran anyway. Baskerville didn't care if you showed up to lectures as long as you kept getting stronger. The Magic Tower stood there in silver, covered in living runes, taller than anything Earth ever built. It felt alive. Stepping toward the entrance, pain ripped through my chest, dragging up memories I'd spent decades burying. The tower back on Earth. Friends who never came home. I laughed it off and told myself this wasn't that tower. Different world. Different outcome. Inside was nothing but white space and a mechanical voice offering 4 difficulty tiers. Easy, medium, hard, and night grave. Most students picked easy. Night grave was the real deal. You died in there. You died for good. Almost nobody chose it. I chose it. The white space shattered, and I found myself in a cold stone labyrinth. The challenge was simple. Destroy the labyrinth core. I spent 20 minutes getting nowhere because the walls kept moving. Then something triggered behind my eyes, and gold light flooded my vision. The eyes of Apex had evolved into something called the Divine God's Eye. It could spot vital points, analyze cultivation up to 3 realms above mine, and reveal hidden paths. 3 realms higher. That alone was absurd enough to break the rules of the world. Golden mist started rising off the floor and forming a trail, which was either super helpful or a trap, but honestly at that point I was past caring. I followed it. Not a single monster showed up the whole way, like the maze had basically rolled out a red carpet for me. The trail ended at a cracked wall, with light leaking through. So I smashed it open because that's what you do when a wall is in your way. Behind it wasn't a core. It was a battlefield with 100 armored orcs in formation, and sitting in the middle was a 4-meter-tall green giant with a battle axe and crimson eyes. The system helpfully informed me he was an orc commodore at the Immortal Realm 3rd Leaf. I was Mortal Realm, so that's like bringing a spork to a demolition derby, but I laughed and raised my sword anyway, because what else are you supposed to do? The next few minutes were kind of a blur. My cultivation was absolute garbage by this world standards, but my swordsmanship was 4 decades of a sword god's experience, which is like having a black belt in a knife fight. Orcs drop one after another. 50 down before my legs gave out, and every drop of mana was gone. The rest closed in. I stood back up anyway, thinking about Mother, the sect, Elia, everyone who'd actually accepted me in this life. I wasn't dying here. Not in some basement maze like a rat. Something snapped inside me. Crimson aura erupted from my body, and a legacy skill kicked in, berserk state. Strength flooded back, pain vanished, and I disappeared into the remaining orcs like I'd had too much coffee. Blood rained across the battlefield. When the mist cleared, only the Commodore was left, and he did not look happy. I drank a recovery potion, got just enough mana back to function, and met his axe head-on. The impact nearly killed me. His raw strength was way beyond mine, and berserk was already fading like my motivation on a Sunday. I couldn't win a contest of power, so I poured everything into Dragon Slayer. First verse. The crimson slash tore across the field, severed his arm, and locked him in place for 5 seconds with true fear. The divine gods I kicked in on its own, painting golden lines across his body until one point burned brighter than the rest. His heart. Convenient. I vanished, 1 slash done. His body split apart and collapsed. Rewards rolled in. Synchronization jumped to 13.5%. Berserk Legacy restored. Lucky draw earned. The battlefield dissolved and I blacked out, which is basically the system's way of saying congratulations, here's a nap. When I woke up, 10 hours had passed. For days left. I opened the lucky draw immediately because I'm an addict. The wheel spun past common, rare, epic, legendary, mythic, and then exploded into gold. Jackpot. The Defy the Heaven pill, grade Mythic++. I'd seen mythic treasures before, the kind emperors went to war over. There wasn't even an official rank above mythic, and here it was anyway, like finding a 20 in your winter coat, except the 20 could rewrite reality. The description said the pill would evolve my avatar by one complete realm, ignoring all cultivation requirements. Not a single leaf. A full realm evolution. I read it 3 times. I clutched the jade bottle and told myself to calm down first, which is what you say right before you do something incredibly stupid. That's when the tower sent a notification that shook the entire academy. In the headmaster's office, the elders stared at the crystal screen in disbelief. Past elite disciples had taken days for that floor, and most never came back. The Vortexian patriarch was sipping tea when the news hit, and when the second notification arrived about the hidden boss being defeated, his teacup slipped from his fingers and shattered. His butler just smiled and said the first headmaster's judgment had never been wrong, which is the kind of thing you say when you've been saying it for decades and you're tired of being right. Across campus, students abandoned lessons to argue about it. Over at the Nightski Sex training courtyard, Kallio heard the news, smiled faintly, and split a training boulder in half with one swing. He'd underestimated me. Good. Keep doing that, buddy. None of that reached me. I was alone in the tower, staring at a golden pill no bigger than my thumb, with strange runes flowing across its surface. In my previous life, I'd spent 40 years climbing towers, fighting through ruins that hadn't seen daylight in a millennium, and I'd never found anything this absurd. I tossed it into my mouth, because hesitation is for people who don't have a death wish and a timeline. It melted on my tongue, and nothing happened. I waited 30 seconds. Nothing. I was about to curse out the system when unbearable pain erupted from somewhere deeper than bone or muscle, something at the foundation of my existence, tearing itself apart like someone was unzipping my soul. Blood ran from my eyes. The system threw up warnings that I didn't meet the requirements for avatar evolution, that the process had exceeded my cultivation limits and couldn't proceed. Classic. Then something unknown overrode it. The system glitched, rewrote its own rules, adjusted the requirements, and authorized the evolution. The system had never adapted itself for anyone. It dictated the laws, and yet it had just bent them for me, which is like the DMV suddenly waiving your paperwork because you looked sad. I didn't have time to think about who or what had that kind of authority. A pillar of golden light tore out of my body and the entire first floor cracked. She rushed in from every direction, remaking my cultivation base at impossible speed. Behind me, the mist that had always been my avatar, vague and formless, finally condensed. Legs, arms, a torso. Silver-white hair, golden armor. Its fingers twitched, it moved on its own for the first time, and 2 golden eyes opened. The pressure it gave off nearly suffocated me, which is a weird way to meet yourself. A heaven-reaching realm avatar. Not an illusion anymore. It had form, presence, weight. It looked down at me for a single moment before dissolving into golden particles and folding back into my body. Warmth spread through me, the pain gone, replaced by strength I hadn't felt since long before this body was mine. Physical strength up, chi absorption greatly increased, avatar manifestation enhanced, synchronization growth rate boosted. Basically, I got a full system upgrade and a pat on the back. I flexed my fist and felt power move through me without resistance for the first time since entering the tower. The gap between a mortal avatar and a heaven-reaching one wasn't just one realm. It was a completely different category of existence, like comparing a bicycle to a motorcycle. For days left, the third-floor treasure was still out there. I turned toward the staircase and started climbing, because, apparently, I hate resting. The staircase to the second floor went on forever, which is a thing that happens in fantasy when the architects hate knees. The moment I crossed the threshold, warm corridors vanished. Freezing wind, an endless graveyard, broken headstones, dead trees twisted toward a crimson sky, thick gray mist swallowing everything beyond 20 meters. It was like someone took a goth teenager's diary and made it three-dimensional. The mission: find the heart of death and destroy it. No monsters listed, no explanation. The silence itself felt wrong, like the quiet before your mom asks, "What happened here?" about the living room. I activated the divine gods. In a golden path, unspooled ahead. 20 minutes in, nothing. Then a crunch behind me. Something was following me. The mist parted, and a figure in rusted armor appeared 50 meters off, head bowed. A heartbeat later, gone. The divine gods, I read it. No cultivation, no chi, no heartbeat. Not alive. Great. Ghost armor. Just what I needed. Then every grave started shaking. Hands burst through the soil. Hundreds of rotting soldiers hauling themselves out of the earth with pale blue fire in their eye sockets. A voice rolled across the cemetery. The dead do not welcome the living. Original. Did they workshop that line? These things didn't stay dead. Cutting one apart only slowed it down. The divine gods, I caught it. A thin strand of black energy ran from each corpse into the earth. They were being puppet. Rather than grind through an endless swarm like some kind of idiot, I ran, the golden trail pulling me deeper, while thousands of undead thundered after me like the world's worst parade. The trail ended at an enormous mausoleum. Its stone door groaned open on its own, which is never a good sign. Inside, a woman sat on a throne built entirely from bone. White hair, pale skin, crimson eyes. The system identified her as a lesser larval lich at a mortal realm's sixth leaf. She smiled and asked if I'd entertain her before I died. The door slammed shut behind me. Charming. The divine gods, I flagged something. Her weak point wasn't in her body. A faint golden thread ran from her down beneath the throne. I told her I could see it. She seemed delighted. 300 years since the last challenger. She'd been bored out of her undead mind, apparently. She raised a finger, and skeletal hands burst from the shadows, grabbing my legs. Dozens of black magic circles bloomed around her, gathering mana into death spears. I let the divine gods, I flood my vision, and the world slowed. In the third circle from the left, mana was gathering just a fraction slower than the rest. Gotcha! I moved through Moon's Step, twisting at angles my body shouldn't have managed. One spear grazed my shoulder. The third collided with the flawed circle. The explosion shook the chamber, and the lich staggered back. I told her she'd been dead too long. Her control was sloppy. Burn. She vanished. The divine gods, I barely caught the motion before a cold hand closed around my throat from behind. Dark mana detonated and threw me through 3 stone pillars. Blood filled my mouth. She was stronger than the Orc Commodore by a wide margin, which is like saying a hurricane is stronger than a ceiling fan. She said she'd let me join her eternal servants. Behind her, thousands of corpses rose at once. An entire army of the dead. Because why fight one thing when you can fight all the things? My eyes went back to the golden thread. I told her I didn't need to kill her. I only needed to destroy her source. Her killing intent detonated. A massive forbidden magic circle spread across the chamber. The system estimated my survival at 0.7%. The divine gods, I blazed. One golden path forming through the darkness, running straight beneath the throne. I bet everything on one strike. Crimson aura ignited as the Berserk legacy caught fire, every drop of mana surging into the blade. Dragon Slayer, first verse. A dragon's roar tore through the mausoleum. Every undead soldier lunged at once. I ignored all of it. The crimson slash tore through the air, aimed at the throne itself. The strike hit dead on, cracks spidering across the stone. I forced my body forward. The lich appeared in front of me, screaming. Thousands of black chains lashed out. The divine gods, I flared, and time slowed. One narrow gap. I pushed into Moon's Step. A chain grazed my shoulder. Another sliced my chest. A third pierced my left arm. But I made it through, because apparently I'm allergic to stopping. The golden thread ran directly into a crystal buried beneath the stone, pulsing like a living heart. Legacy Threshold Myth. Dragon Slayer Art, / unlocked. Timing's everything, I guess. I raised the sword with both hands. Dragon Slayer. / The blade fell. The crystal shattered. The world froze. The lich's body went rigid. Cracks spread through her pale skin. One by one, the undead army stopped moving, blue flames guttering out. The cemetery went silent. The lich looked at me and smiled. Not with hatred, with relief. She said thank you. She was finally freed. Then she dissolved into silver particles, which is honestly a way better exit than most people get. Rewards rolled in. Synchronization up to 13.5%, plus another lucky draw. Warmth surged through me. I sat cross-legged and let Cosmic Wave take over until the bottleneck at 3rd leaf finally gave. Mortal Realm, 4th leaf. Level up, whatever. Facing Kalio now, at least the fight wouldn't be entirely one-sided. 3 days remained. I opened the lucky draw. The wheel spun and stopped. Nothing. After the heaven-defying pill, I had no business expecting a second miracle in the same week. That's like winning the lottery twice and being surprised when the third ticket's a dud. I stepped through the gate ahead. Scorching wind hit me instantly. The cold cemetery vanished, replaced by an endless sea of golden sand under 3 blazing suns. Something vast moved beneath the dunes in the distance. The real challenge was just starting, which is what everyone says right before everything goes to hell. 3 suns hung over an ocean of gold sand, heat thick enough to bend the horizon. I'd fought orcs and a lich. Nothing prepared me for a floor that just wanted to boil me alive before anything got the chance to kill me properly. It's like showing up to a sword fight and the arena's just a giant oven. I reached for the divine gods. I out of habit. Denied. Authority detected. I activation denied. No golden trail, no guidance. Just heat, sand, and something enormous shifting beneath the dunes far to my left. I'd leaned on those eyes through the labyrinth and the graveyard. Now, on the one floor made of nothing but empty directions, they'd gone dark. Thanks, system. Real helpful. The Patriarch's map was a few crimson lines against blank parchment. No scale, no landmarks, just a single mark near the center. I picked a direction and walked, because when you're lost in a desert with 3 suns, all directions are equally wrong. The first day passed in heat and silence. The second brought company. 3 sand serpents broke the surface. Mortal Realm, 7th leaf. 3 leaves above me. Know how to pick out weak points. I ran, cutting whatever got close. By the time the last worm gave up, my water and supplies were gone. Great. Now I was dehydrated and sunburned in a magical desert. When I lifted my head, a shape had risen from the heat haze. A pyramid, exactly where the map promised. Finally, something that didn't suck. Inside, the desert's heat cut off like a closed door. Cool stone air, old dust. I ate the last scraps and stood back up. Authority restored. Divine gods, I reactivated. Gold spread across my vision and caught 2 things. A mist trailed deeper into the pyramid, and something on my wrist responding. Mother's bracelet had gone warm, a thin gold light tracing its cracked links like something inside had just opened its eyes. Okay, that's creepy but also kind of cool. I followed the mist deeper until the passage opened into a wide chamber. A figure waited in the center. 8 feet tall, bronze skin, robes marking him as something between soldier and monk. Onbu, Divine Realm 4th leaf. The strongest thing I'd ever stood in front of, and I'd stood in front of some seriously strong things. He told me to just die. Then he was in front of me. Distance meant nothing to him. But his eyes dropped to my wrist, and he asked how I had this fragment. I told him it was my father's. Onbu stared at the bracelet. Then he stepped back and inclined his head. He said with my current strength, he could end me in a single motion. So he wouldn't. Not today. He pressed a dark stone token into my hand, marking me as recognized by the 3rd floor. Come back when I was worth killing properly. Chill guy. He offered 7 hours before his authority expired. Spar with him. Show him something worth the wait. He'd guarded this sand and silence for longer than my bloodline had existed. He wanted to see what that fragment eventually became. By the second hour, the amusement on his face had gone somewhere quieter. Cosmic Wave dragged fresh chi into me with every exchange, and Dragon Slayer's first verse answered faster than it should have. By the fourth hour, Berserk caught fire, and I stopped counting how many times he knocked me flat, because I kept getting up faster, which I'm pretty sure was the point. Past the sixth hour, he asked how I was still climbing. I wasn't even cultivating, only fighting. I told him that was the secret. He laughed, an actual laugh, rough and startled out of him. I'll take it. When the seventh hour ran out, something in my chest shifted and clicked into place. Mortal Realm, fifth leaf. 7 hours of getting beaten up, and that's my reward. Worth it, honestly. I told Onbu I'd be back. Whatever was sealed behind what he guarded, I intended to earn it properly. He stepped aside and the passage opened. He told me to go. Something else was waiting outside this floor. Vague and ominous. Classic. 3 days had shrunk to hours. Kallio wasn't going to wait. I tucked the token beside my jade pendant, closed my hand around the bracelet to feel its warmth fade, and walked back out. Sunlight hit me like a physical blow stepping out of the tower after 3 days of sand and stone dark. A crowd had gathered around the tower's base. The silence broke the instant someone spotted me. Murmurs stacked up. I hadn't realized how visible the change was. Mortal Realm, fifth leaf from where I'd walked in 3 days ago. Someone near the front did the math out loud and went pale. A girl whispered that Kallio had only reached sixth leaf that morning, and he'd had his immortal avatar the whole time. Yeah, well, I don't have an immortal avatar. I have something better. Or worse. Depends on the day. I didn't have the energy to enjoy it. My legs still ached from 7 hours of getting knocked down by something divine realm. You try getting thrown around by a guy who could end you with a thought and see how you feel. The crowd parted and the Vortexian Patriarch stood waiting in the flesh. He stared at me like he was recalculating something. I fought on the third floor and survived. He said he hadn't expected to pay out this debt so soon. An elder set down a heavy chest at my feet. 1,200 mortal cultivation pills, as promised. Then he asked if I'd given any thought to marriage. Elia's voice cut through the crowd before I could answer. We were not doing this here. She had her father by the sleeve, half dragging him toward the elders. She turned back just long enough to catch my eye, and for one unguarded second, whatever she'd been holding back slipped through. Not embarrassment. Something quieter and considerably more dangerous to my concentration than anything Onbu had thrown at me. And Onbu had thrown me through a wall. Metaphorically. Repeatedly. She apologized about him and was gone. I stood there a second too long before remembering I had roughly 3 hours before Kallio. The dorm room was quiet. I dropped the chest of pills and started eating them. No ceremony, no pacing. By the time I'd gone through 100, the system warned me about excessive consumption. I drew my sword and dropped in a Moon's verse, layering Cosmic Wave underneath it. Chi surged the instant the two techniques locked together, ripping through 100 pills worth of raw cultivation and folding it into groaning meridians. 30 minutes. Robes soaked, hands shaking, but every drop had gone somewhere useful. 2 hours left. I lay on the floor for one of them, thinking about a bracelet that had recognized a stranger's floor guardian on sight, and a girl who'd looked back at me like she wanted an answer I hadn't given her yet. I decided both of those were problems for future me. Present me had a duel to lose or win. Then I got up and went to do that. The stadium was full, tiered stone seating packed around a circular arena, noble house banners snapping overhead. Betting stalls ran the length of the outer wall. Almost all of it favored Kallio. His immortal avatar was cited like it settled the argument before either of us drew a blade. Near the largest betting stall, I slapped down a sum large enough to make the runner look up. 120,000 teals on Lenfan. He started to mention the odds. I told him to let the show begin. I walked toward the arena, unwinding the cloth from my face as the announcer's voice rolled out and the crowd dropped to hell breath. Kallio was waiting at the center, immortal avatar coiled behind him like a second shadow, a smile rehearsed for weeks. He said I'd come. I smiled back and drew my sword. Let's start the duel. The stadium went quiet. 10,000 eyes doing the same math. Mortal Realm, 6th Leaf. I'd walked into that dorm room 3 hours ago at 5th. Someone said no cultivation method on the continent absorbed raw pills that fast. They weren't wrong. Barely 100 of the 1,200 pills folded into my meridians through cosmic wave and stubbornness. From 20 meters away, nobody was doing careful arithmetic. They were doing the kind of math that turns into legend by sundown. Even Kallio went still, something like fear crossing his face before he remembered he wasn't supposed to have any. Up in the private box, the headmaster set down his tea. The Vortexian patriarch watched me cross the sand. He asked himself if I'd bring the sword's sect back to glory. Then he caught himself. The sect's power never faded on its own. Something had been hollowing it out from inside for years, and everyone kept blaming bad luck instead of asking who benefited. He'd suspected it since the day my father died, surrounded by men who shouldn't have known which gate to breach first. He spoke quietly to his dead friend Xian. He'd kept his promise. I was alive. More than alive. Back on the sand, the referee said begin the duel. Kallio offered to let me strike first. Wouldn't want anyone saying he didn't give the son of a dead sect a fair chance. I told him not to regret it, and closed the distance before the sentence finished. Stahl mit Steel. He'd expected resistance. What he got was his own arm skidding backward, boots carving grooves into ground that had never given an inch to him before. He asked how his 1,000-year blade art was being pushed back by a gutter technique from a dead sect. I didn't answer. We traded again, faster. I found the opening before he'd finished closing it. My blade caught him inside his guard. He twisted fast enough to save anything worse than a graze, but I felt it land deeper than skin. His chi stuttered. Just once. He called it lucky, same as that day in the courtyard. His eyes went dark. He said he would have killed me within the week if the old man hadn't interfered. Then he said something that changed everything. His father should have gone there himself. That day, personally, the words landed behind my ribs, and everything went distant. That day, the one with white banners on every rooftop, the one that ended with my father's sword sliding from his hand one final time. I asked what he'd just said. Kallio blinked, registering too late that he'd said something he hadn't meant to say. The sneer faltered, not from guilt, from the sense that he'd handed me something he couldn't take back. My father should have gone there himself, not the Blood Moon sect, not some faceless cult. Him, the head of the Nightsky sect. Personally, I thought of my father's blood running down a courtyard he'd bled to protect. I thought of the assassin behind him where no elder could see, and the question that man had asked with fear in his voice right before I ended him. I thought of a hidden thread the legacy system had shown me beneath a broken formation, and how it had never occurred to me to ask who else might have known where to look. Up in the box, the Vortexian patriarch went very still. On the arena floor, something old and patient and long buried under a decade of grief finally began to wake up. Rage rarely arrives the way stories describe it. It goes quiet first, cold, precise. That was how it came for me, settling into my spine and calculating how much damage it could do. I told Kallio to say it again. His sneer reassembled. He decided to double down instead of retreat. He said maybe if my father's sect had bent the knee when asked to, he'd still be alive too. Something tore loose in my chest. The world sharpened unbearably clear. Every grain of sand, every held breath, every flicker of chi across Kallio's avatar. Behind me, the air began to bend. A figure took shape in the fog. Not the flickering outline every mortal realm cultivator carried, but something with weight. A man in old battle-worn armor, one hand on a sword that had never needed to be drawn to be understood. Professor Julian's teacup stopped halfway to her lips in the private box. She'd once told me my avatar was astonishingly small. She understood now. It hadn't been small. It had been standing so far above her realm that her senses couldn't measure it. His avatar was heaven-reaching realm. Across the arena, Kallio's immortal avatar began to shrink. He asked what I was doing to it. I told him it was just remembering where it stands. Berserk legacy activation threshold met. I let it in. Crimson bled through my vision. Every ache stopped matching. My father's face. The hidden blade behind his shadow. Kalio's words about his father. I closed the distance. Dragon Slayer, first verse. The stadium felt the pressure more than heard it. My blade found his arm first. Gone before blood caught up. I didn't stop. His ear next. 2 fingers off his raised hand. Each strike landed before the crowd could gasp. Kalio's screams blurred into one continuous sound. I wasn't fighting a duel anymore. I was taking something apart. My sword rose for the killing blow when a hand closed around my wrist. The headmaster. His grip felt like gravity. Killing was forbidden. Kalio could no longer defend himself. Something in me didn't care. I turned on him. Mooncut, 5th form. He caught the edge against 2 fingers, the same effortless way the patriarch once had. The shockwave blew grit and silence across half the arena. He told me to look at him, not Kalio. Me. His hand settled on my shoulder, steady, the crimson haze losing its grip 1 heartbeat at a time. He said there I was. The rage stepped back far enough to let the rest of me catch up. I looked down. Kalio lay several meters off, most of one arm gone, blood soaking into dark sand. Alive. Barely. The referee declared me the winner. No one cheered. The silence felt like a stadium recalibrating what it knew about the world. In the private box, a broad-shouldered man in dark robes hadn't moved through the entire fight. The Nitsky sect crest on his chest, knuckles white on the balcony rail. He watched his son carried off in pieces, and something in his face closed like a door. He said the child needed to be dealt with, before it was too late. Below, unaware of the promise being made about my life, I sheathed my sword with shaking hands and let myself breathe. Twice in one day, I'd asked this body to give me everything. I felt it happen from the outside, the sword slipping from my fingers, my knees meeting sand. The referee was still talking about the duel being decided. It didn't matter. I'd already gotten what I came for. Kalio's father should have gone there himself. My hand curled into a fist. I knew who was responsible now, and I still couldn't touch them. Not at 6th Leaf Mortal Realm against a sect whose heir carried an immortal avatar like it was nothing. Knowing a name and being able to do anything about it were 2 different debts. I could only afford to carry one. The dark came up to meet me. I woke in the academy's medical hall. Pale wood ceiling, crushed herbs, clean linen. Sunlight through a cracked window. A girl near the door, setting flowers on a table. Elia. She went still when I woke. Said I was awake, good. I started to say she didn't have to, but she was already moving through the door. Get well soon, she said fast, like the words had been loaded in her mouth, and she'd only just found the nerve. Footsteps receding at a pace that had everything to do with escape. 2 lifetimes of experience, an avatar the system had trouble classifying, and not one shred of insight into why she'd fled a hospital room like it was on fire. I decided this was a mystery for a version of me with fewer open wounds. My mind dragged itself back to what it needed to work on. My father should have gone there himself. I turned the sentence over slower. The Nitsky sect hadn't needed the Heavenly Sword sect gone. They already held more territory, more disciples, more standing. Ruining a rival that posed no real threat wasn't strategy. It was waste, unless someone else had wanted the Heavenly Sword sect gone badly enough to spend the Nitsky sect's reputation buying it. Someone gave the order. Kalio's father simply carried it out. If that was true, the Nitsky sect wasn't the wall between me and my father's killers. It was only the first door. I didn't get the chance to decide what was behind the second one. The air changed before any sound did. Something vast and patient was closing the distance at a speed that had no business belonging to anything human. The system flagged it. Golden Knight. Threat Assessment Extreme. The same rank as the giant who'd stood over my father's corpse. I was 6th Leaf Mortal Realm, half-healed, flat on my back, and something built to end Immortal Realm cultivators was close enough that I could feel the pressure in my teeth. I didn't have time to reach for my sword. I didn't get the chance to need it. A second presence arrived a half-breath after the first. Where the Golden Knight's aura had felt like a blade in my throat, this one felt like the sky leaning down to stand between us. I never saw the strike land. Only a shape in silver mist between my bed and the window, one hand extended, and the wet sound of a blade finding a throat that never finished its approach. The assassin hit the floor in two pieces. The Vortexian Patriarch. The system reassessed him. Platinum rank. Divine realm. I hadn't understood exactly how far above me strong actually meant. He sat in the chair beside my bed. I asked why a divine realm cultivator personally intervened for a sixth leaf mortal. He'd sent me into the tower to keep Kallio off my throat. Now, he was killing Golden Knight assassins outside my window. That wasn't the kind of attention a man like him spent on nothing. Your father was a great man, he said. I said I knew. He corrected me. I knew the man who died holding a sword he never wanted. He knew the boy before that. They'd been classmates at this academy. The patriarch had been loud, arrogant, and there was this scrawny 10-year-old from a minor sect who cried over the smallest things. The other boys made a game of it. Xian hated the sword, not fear of losing, but a real aversion to hurting anything on purpose. He wanted books, philosophy, scholarship that never drew blood. The patriarch mocked him for it. What he was actually looking at was a boy with more talent than anyone he'd trained with in 40 years, who refused to let that talent become a weapon. It took his sect's need and his family's survival to finally put a blade in those hands. He carried it his whole life like an apology for being good at something he never wanted. Despite never fully devoting to the martial path, he'd reached Blue Knight realm, one step from Golden. I hadn't understood what it cost a gentle boy to become someone capable of trading blows with monsters 3 realms above him just so his family could survive one more hour. He never told me any of that, I said quietly. Not directly, not in words. He wouldn't have. The patriarch had made a promise to Xian. If anything happened to him, he'd make sure his line didn't end with it. He'd let that promise gather dust too long. I asked why the Knightsky sect wanted us gone. They had nothing to gain, everything to lose, spending blood on a rival already fading on his own. The Heavenly Sword sect didn't fade on its own. It was hollowed patiently over years by hands that made certain my father never had the resources to notice before they came down. He didn't have a name, but he had a careful guess. Whoever ordered it wanted something specific from a sect's ruin. Not territory, not spoils. Something worth burning an entire mountain down to get. My mind went to the bracelet on my wrist, worn once in a desert pyramid and silent since. The patriarch's gaze followed. Something like recognition crossed his face that he wasn't ready to explain. He didn't ask. I didn't offer. He told me to rest, to grow strong enough that the next assassin didn't need him in the room. At the door he paused. Whatever I found about my father, remember the boy, not just the man who died holding a sword. He earned both halves. Don't let the ending erase the beginning. Then he was gone. I was alone with white flowers and a bracelet that was the second half of a question nobody was ready to ask. I closed my hand around it and cried, for the first time since the invasion, the way a 10-year-old boy who missed his father was allowed to. 3 weeks had passed since the patriarch killed the assassin and told me half a story about my father. The system hadn't said a word that wasn't a training log. No emergencies. No blue light unfolding at the worst possible moment. Just quiet that should have felt like relief, and mostly just felt like waiting. I stood at the training grounds watching first years drill basic forms, sweat soaking through robes that hadn't learned what real exhaustion felt like. None of them noticed me. Ever since the tower, everything had gone still. No new legacy resonance, no notification dragging me toward the next crisis. Just my own reflection in a training pond and a small persistent worry circling for days. The patriarch wouldn't always be close enough to intervene. Golden Knight assassins didn't cue politely. If someone was hollowing out my sect's foundations one silent year at a time, they wouldn't stop because the last attempt failed in front of a witness who outranked them by 3 realms. I had to be strong enough that the next attack didn't need saving from. Not for his sake, for my father's, for a mother still waiting behind a mountain gate. I checked my status. Mortal Realm 6th Leaf. Heaven-reaching Avatar, 1st Leaf. Synchronization at 13.5%. It hadn't moved since the Lich's tomb. I opened the bloodline details. Sealed. Origin unknown. Main quest. Uncover the secret of your bloodline. Reward: plus 10% sync and an egg of unknown origin. 10% for a single quest. More than every battle since the tower combined. The sex vault beneath the ruined hall was gone. Whatever records had kept the bloodline history had burned or been carried off. I thought about Onbu and dismissed it. Not foolish enough to walk back into that desert yet. That left the library. Baskerville's archive was the largest collection of recorded history on the continent. 6 stories of shelving around a central atrium, lit by captured chi light. The air smelled like old paper and the silence of things nobody had asked about in a long time. I found the Heavenly Sword sex entry, for thin volumes written by scholars who considered the subject a footnote. I pulled them down and only then noticed the gap behind where they'd stood. A seam in the wood, too clean to be accidental. At the center, worn nearly smooth by decades, a symbol. A closed circle wrapped around a downward blade, 3 marks radiating off the hilt. I'd seen it once before, carved into my grandfather's throat in the one surviving portrait of him, half burned at the edges. Nobody in Lin Fan's memories had a story for that mark. He'd vanished before Lin Fan was born, and the family had learned to stop asking. I pressed 2 fingers against the symbol. The system warned of unknown force attempting to draw blood. Recommended removing hand immediately. I pulled back. Something behind that symbol had reached for me the instant I touched it, patient and certain, like a door waiting a long time for someone to knock the right way. Curiosity got people killed. I'd never been good at listening to that warning. Not when the door had my family's blood carved into the lock. I bit my finger and pressed the wound against the symbol. The mark drank it. No glow, no flerish. Just with darkening like it was thirsty and finally fed. Then the shelving shuddered, and a wall slid backward into darkness. Heavenly Sword sect bloodline detected. Hereditary vault unlocking. Behind it, a small chamber with a stone pedestal. 2 books waited wrapped in dusty cloth, exactly where someone had left them and never come back. I lifted the first. No title in any script Lin Fan's memories could place. Symbols curled and doubled back in patterns that looked less like language and more like something language had grown out of. The system offered to decode using legacy authority. Whatever my family had actually been before fire and ruin reduced it to grieving elders and a boy who wasn't entirely who they thought. The answer was here. Patient as the mark that led me to it.so, I said yes. Obviously, you don't get handed a mystery vault and then just go back to your regular scheduled programming. I stacked up 5 sect histories under one arm like I was a used bookstore and made it exactly as far as the checkout desk before some guy materialized out of nowhere and was like 3 books per visit, buddy. 200 years old, skin like old receipt paper, beard the color of a bone left in the sun, and wearing dark round sunglasses in a library lit by magic glow orbs. Sunglasses. Indoors. On a continent that hadn't invented polarized lenses. I almost lost it. Then the system, because it has the comedic timing of a horror movie sound designer, hits me with Supreme Realm Presence detected. Death probability, 100%. Immediate withdrawal recommended. Thanks, system. Real helpful. Like I hadn't already figured that out from my knees buckling and my books hitting the floor before I did. The pressure wasn't even aimed at me. It was just existing in the same room, the way a space heater exists in a small office. My legs just decided they were done. The old man asked if something was funny. Still bored. Still mildly annoyed, like I was a customer who'd brought in an expired coupon. I bowed as low as my non-functioning legs would let me and apologized. Pressure gone. Just like that. He crouched down and picked up my books himself, then froze the second he saw the 2 I'd pulled from the vault. The boredom vanished off his face like someone hitting a power switch. He asked where I got them. I said nothing, because when a 200-year-old man's mere existence is crushing your internal organs, silence feels like the right call. He set the ancient books aside like they were loaded weapons and invited me for tea. In his room, I hesitated, for what I'm sure was the world's most understandable reason. He said if he meant me harm, nobody on the continent could stop him, which I'd literally just felt. So I followed. Only 2 people had ever hit Supreme Realm in living memory. One was Alfredo Van, the Vortexian family's hermit. The other was officially dead 50 years ago. Master Dororo. Except dead guys don't usually sit around complaining about people laughing at their sunglasses. His quarters were 3 floors below the archive, behind an unmarked door, cluttered with 2 centuries of notes in the same curling script from the vault. He poured tea without asking and offered to take an oath of the arcane first if I was nervous. Mages who lied on that oath lost all their mana. He wasn't about to throw away 50 years of study over a chat with a kid. So I told him everything. The gap behind the shelf. The mark matching a half-burned portrait. The blood. The vault. 2 books neither of us could read. Dororo listened without saying a word. By the time I was done, his tea was cold. A bloodlocked hereditary vault behind a public archive, key to a bloodline the world thought was extinct. In 50 years of cataloging every scrap of arcane writing on the continent, he'd never heard of anything that precise. He asked to examine the book. The second his fingers touched it, the thing detonated. Not fire, not an explosion. A blast of raw mana ripped out of the cover and yeeted a Supreme Realm archmage into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Teapot gone. Every loose page in the room rattling. I was on my feet before my brain had filed the paperwork for that decision. He was laughing, bleeding from where he'd bitten through his lip, hitting the wall, disheveled and laughing. A Supreme Realm mage who'd handled cursed relics that ate people's arms off, and this book had rejected him like he was a door-to-door salesman. He'd heard rumors in 50 years of digging through things that should have stayed buried. Blood-bonded texts, written to recognize one specific person, sealed against every other hand, no matter how much power it carried. This one was mine. He couldn't decode it, couldn't even hold it long enough to try, which meant unless he wanted to walk away from the most interesting thing to happen in his very long life, he didn't have much choice. He'd teach me to read it myself, once a week when my training allowed. In exchange, I'd keep my mouth shut about the dead archivist upstairs being very much alive. I looked at the shattered teapot, at the crack in the wall where a Supreme Realm cultivator had just been thrown by a book, at 2 centuries of careful boredom cracking open into something that looked, for the first time since I'd met him, almost like hope. We had a deal. He said, let's find out what my bloodline had been so terrified of that it locked itself away from everyone except me. 3 weeks of cold tea and cracked plaster getting patched and cracked again. Somewhere in there, the script on those vault pages stopped looking like static and started looking like language. Dororo was patient, poking, occasionally explosive when he forgot himself and grabbed for the book without thinking. Today, for the first time, he didn't take it back from me at the end. He said I wasn't ready, but closer to ready than he was to being patient, and he had exactly 1 century of self-restraint left before he started trying to read it out of pure spite. He waved at the door. Go break something quietly for once. I left with 3 books under one arm, the 2 from the vault and a slim history volume I'd grabbed on the way out. The regular version of my family story might come in handy before I went digging for the parts nobody bothered writing down. I made it exactly as far as the courtyard before the universe decided to make things weird. Elia was coming out of the training hall, silver hair wet, sword slung over one shoulder. Our eyes met, and something in her posture just short-circuited. She looked away first. Fussed, the kind of fast that means the opposite of not caring. She was already walking the other way, spine rigid, pace too controlled, color climbing up the back of her neck visible through her hair. I stood there with 3 books balanced against my hip and laughed. Whatever talk her dad had tried to start outside the magic tower a month ago clearly hadn't stopped echoing in her head. I filed it under problems for a version of me with fewer open books and possibly fewer brain cells. The dorm room was quiet. I spread all 3 volumes out and grabbed the one that didn't fight back. History and Founding of the Heavenly Sword Sect. I opened it expecting maybe a footnote. The founding century, the Heavenly Sword Sect had no competition on the entire Chronos continent. 7 elders under 1 patriarch, 5 divine realm, 2 supreme realm, 2 supreme realm cultivators. Right now, on the whole continent, there were exactly 2. A reclusive Vortexian ancestor and a dead man drinking tea in a basement. This sect alone had once held 2 at that level, as elders, beneath the patriarch. The patriarch, Teen Len, held Supreme Realm's sixth leaf, unmatched by anyone alive. His avatar was beyond classification, one of only 5 ever seen on the continent. 3 Supreme Realm under one roof. They'd backed a minor prince during the Continental Wars, carried him to the throne as first emperor of Statera Kingdom. In return, the emperor swore the crown wouldn't touch the sex business for a century, and their top 10 status was untouchable. That's why we were still in the top 10, even hollowed out. A promise nobody alive remembered making, still quietly holding the door open. Then Milo's kingdom, the continent's strongest military, came for the new Statera. Emperor Stut Milos, Supreme Realm's sixth leaf, matched only by our patriarch. The Emperor of Statera didn't send a single bloodline expert to that fight. The Heavenly Sword sect held the line alone for 3 months with 0 backup, until the patriarch died in combat, having killed 1 Supreme Realm general and cut off Emperor Stut Milos' arm. Not one expert sent. 3 months of a family bleeding out to hold a border, and the throne he'd bought with that blood didn't spare 1 reinforcement. If I hadn't already sworn an oath to a crown I couldn't walk away from, I understood exactly what I'd have done to that emperor with my bare hands. The patriarch's last condition: his wife and kids get to live in exchange for ending the war. Emperor Milos agreed. Patriarch died with dignity, honored even by the enemy. Milos pulled out. So that was the truth under the ruin. Not weakness, not decline from failure. A sect that had once been 3 Supreme Realms deep, bled white to buy a throne its founder never lived to see safe, by an emperor who didn't spend a single soldier helping. No wonder we faded, never allowed to recover from the first hit before the world started collecting the next. I got why the Nightsky sect's attack never made sense on its own. A sect this thin, held up by a promise nobody remembered, wasn't worth the blood to erase. Unless someone wanted something specific enough to make that math work anyway. I reached for the second book. The second my fingers touched the cover, I got why Dororo couldn't hold it. It didn't fight me. No violent rejection, no mana going off. Something in it recognized my hand and just opened. Not physically, not yet. Just a feeling distant and certain of a lock deciding it had finally found the right key. 3 weeks of lessons meant I could read maybe 1 word in 5. I opened to the first page anyway, because I'm an optimist or possibly an idiot. The first line took almost a full minute to work through, character by character. If you were reading this, then the blood finally found its way back to itself, and I owe you an apology I won't be alive to give in person. Whoever wrote this wasn't a scholar cataloging a dead sect from a comfortable chair. This was written by someone who expected specifically that I would be the one holding it. The next line stopped me cold. Half of it wasn't in the ancient script at all. It was in characters I recognized instantly. Plan, Blackie, Aking mi familia. Smartphone, television, the internet. Words that had no business appearing in a book buried behind a library shelf on a continent without highways or satellites. I sat back so hard the book nearly slid off my knees. Whoever wrote this hadn't been born on dementia. They'd come from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that sounded, line after impossible line, exactly like Earth. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn I'd reread the same 4 pages more times than I could count and understood none of it. The regular script I could work through. The other language, the one talking about smartphones and televisions, just sat there daring me to make sense of it and refused to cooperate. I want to find someone more qualified. Dororo opened his door, already holding fresh tea, which told me he'd expected this visit before I'd finished climbing the stairs. The man was either psychic or just very, very good at predicting when I'd had a bad night. I set the book down, opened to the page that had kept me up the longest, and asked what language it was. He crouched over it without touching it and went very still. He asked where I'd learned to read this. I said I hadn't. That was the problem. I recognized it. I just didn't understand how. So I told him. Not everything. Not the tower, not the dragon, not a brother's blade coming out of my chest. But enough. That before this life, there'd been another world. One with glass towers. One where the word on that page meant something so ordinary that kids carry them in their pockets. Dororo said in 200 years, he'd found exactly 3 confirmed accounts of a soul crossing between worlds. 3 in the entire recorded history of this continent. I'd make 4. He said he didn't think I was the first in my bloodline to cross. That language meant nothing to me until I died and woke up here. Yet here it was in my family's own handwriting generations before I was born. Either time ran weirder than either of us understood, or someone else made the same crossing long ago. Someone who founded this sect. Dororo flipped the history volume to the first page. Teen Len, founder of the Heavenly Sword Sect. Origin, unrecorded. In a continent that documented every minor merchant's birth village, the founder's origin was left blank. Not lost, left, deliberately. A founder with an avatar scholars couldn't classify. Supreme Realm's 6th leaf with no recorded past. A bloodline vault sealed behind blood and warning. A book addressed to whoever shared his blood and his crossing. He knew someone like me would come eventually. He wrote it for that person. This time, with 3 weeks of lessons actually paying off, the regular script gave way easier than the night before, like the book had decided to stop making me work so hard for it. The founder's words. He came to this world already old, already tired, from a place where he'd spent a lifetime failing to be remarkable. Something vast and patient watched him cross the same way it watched me. It called itself nothing he could name, just a door. It didn't forget the ones who crossed, and didn't always let them stay forgotten. He built a sect to be strong enough that nothing on this world could threaten what he loved. But the real danger was never from this world. Something came looking for what he carried. It cost him nearly everything before he learned to close the door. Not by hiding his strength, but by hiding the thing that made him visible to it. He sealed the bloodline the day his first child was born. Not punishment, a shield. Every generation carrying his blood without waking, it stayed invisible, ordinary, safe. He chose to let his legacy sleep rather than risk it finding another one of us before we were strong enough to survive being found. The seal wasn't a secret. It was a hiding place. Dororo pointed out I'd already woken it up without knowing why it was ever asleep. The system's old glitch flashed in my memory. Unknown authority detected. Previous world records found. It hadn't been confused about one crossing. It had been finding 2, stacked on top of each other in the same blood. My bloodline already carried 1 crossing, and my soul had brought a second one into the same body. That's why it kept failing to classify me. I was never the only reason Kermitos didn't fit anywhere on this world's chart. The founder's last entry was shorter, handwriting less steady. Something came looking for him once. It may already be stirring. I wasn't chosen because I was the strongest thing it could find. I was chosen because I already knew how to refuse to stop. That would matter more than any realm, any leaf, any avatar this world had a name for. Grow strong enough that when it comes to collect what it thinks it's owed, it finds a debt it can't afford to call in. Signed TL. The quest updated. Partial completion. Origin confirmed. Founder identity confirmed. Reward. Plus 7% sync and the egg of unknown origin, bonded. Something warm pressed against my chest before I'd even finished reading the notification. Smooth, warm, about the size of a fist. It had simply decided it already belonged to me. Classic. Dororo said only 7% because I didn't have the full truth yet. My founder said something came looking for him once. It hadn't forgotten. It may already be stirring. I'd woken a bloodline, put to sleep on purpose by a man strong enough to stand at Supreme Realm's 6th leaf, specifically because he wasn't strong enough to survive being found a second time. I thought of my grandfather's mark, half-burned in a portrait nobody liked to look at too long, of a man who'd vanished from family history before I was born. My grandfather found this too. That's why he disappeared. Dororo didn't answer. The silence between us was heavy and certain, filling in the shape of an answer neither of us wanted to say out loud. I closed my hand around the warm shape against my chest. I had 2 things to grow strong enough for now instead of 1. Great. Just great. Outside, the sun had cleared the eastern wall and the academy was starting up again. Students, swords, laughter that belonged to a world with no idea how old the war standing behind one of its own students actually was. Dororo had the second book opened before I'd finished sitting down. 6 nights straight arguing with a piece of paper. He looked like death warmed over. My blood was the only key either book had ever recognized. I cut my thumb and pressed it against my grandfather's letter. The ink didn't just settle this time. It rearranged. Symbols folded into new shapes, script older than the sect itself peeling back layer by layer into something Dororo's decades of study could finally grab hold of. He read in silence before his voice came, stripped of every trace of dryness. My grandfather's letter to his son. He loved him more than he ever managed to show. Everything withheld was to keep him safe from a truth that had hunted their blood since before either existed to carry it. Their line didn't begin with a sword or a sect. It began with a union neither side of creation was supposed to allow. A warden of the Ethereum court, sworn to heaven, and a bound duke of the abyssal wastes, sworn to no one. What passed between them was never meant to produce a child. When it did, both courts agreed. That child should not be permitted to exist. That child lived anyway. Hid, founded a mortal sect on a forgettable mountain. Married a mortal woman. Prayed that a bloodline diluted across enough ordinary generations would eventually stop matching to anyone still counting. It had not stopped matching. Both sides had spent centuries sending quiet hands to make sure their blood never grew strong enough to remind the world it existed. The grandfather felt them closing in and chose to vanish rather than lead them to his son's door. Whoever ordered the ruin of the sect wasn't interested in a rival's ambition. They were interested in erasing a mistake 2 courts had never forgiven themselves for allowing to breathe. Angel and demon. That's what was sealed inside my entire bloodline. Diluted generation after generation, exactly as my grandfather hoped. And yet it wasn't diluted in me. Whatever else I'd carried into this body from where I came from, it appeared to have woken something my bloodline spent generations trying to keep asleep. The quest completed. Sync up to 24%. Egg bonded. Bloodline status. Sealed, but unlock available, requiring host confirmation. I stared at that last line. One confirmation, and whatever my grandfather had spent his disappearance trying to keep contained would be mine to open. No pressure. Dororo said I wasn't going to press it. It wasn't a question. No, not until I understood what I'd be waking and who'd come looking the moment I did. My grandfather disappeared to buy his son time. I wasn't going to waste it by rushing into the exact mistake he spent his life trying to prevent. Dororo approved. Power that wasn't ready to be held properly rarely waited patiently. I'd done well to recognize that before it recognized me first. I sat with the weight of it. A warden of heaven and a duke of the abyss, folded across centuries into a 10-year-old boy who'd once been someone else entirely. 2 impossible inheritances stacked inside one exhausted body. Neither heaven nor hell would claim me. I was never particularly interested in belonging to either of them anyway. There was still a second half of the book. My grandfather had written more than a confession. Whatever came after was less about where I came from and more about what he expected me to do about it. I reached for the next page. Let's find out what an old man who vanished for his son's sake actually wanted from the grandson he never got to meet. The egg sat on my desk for 2 full days before I worked up the nerve to look at it properly. Part exhaustion from a bloodline confession involving 2 warring courts of creation, part a slightly embarrassing reluctance to find out that a reward this strange came with strings I wasn't ready for. Smaller than I expected, barely bigger than both fists together. Charcoal shell threaded with thin veins that caught the light like buried embers. It didn't feel like chi. It didn't feel like anything the system had a category for, which was becoming a theme. The system identified it as an egg of unknown origin, draconic lineage suspected. It needed sustained exposure to dragon slayer art cultivation performed nearby to wake up. Of course it was draconic. Dragon Slayer had put half my meridians through hell more times than I care to count, tore my own arm off once, and now the universe's idea of balancing the ledger was handing me an egg that needed exactly that technique to hatch. I told it somebody up there had a sense of irony. Given what I just learned about who might be watching, that thought landed less funny than I meant it to. I started that evening, dropping into Dragon Slayer's first verse with the egg close enough to catch whatever bled off. Cosmic wave hummed beneath it, pulling chi into me with every motion, except now a thin thread of that gathered chi curled sideways instead of settling into my meridians, drifting toward the egg like it recognized something in the technique that belonged to it. The shell warmed barely. A single ember-thin vein brightened, held for a moment, and faded. I kept at it every evening, folding proximity practice into my usual training. Some nights nothing happened. Some nights the veins lit gold briefly before dimming. By the fifth night, the egg was permanently warm. By the seventh, it moved on its own. I was halfway through the closing form when the egg gave a single sharp lurch against its cloth, hard enough that I nearly tripped catching it. A crack spread across the shell, thin as a hair, then a dozen more branching off like frost on a window. Something inside pushed once, twice, a small muffled sound of effort that did something unreasonable to my chest for a creature I hadn't even seen yet. Hatching sequence initiated. Do not interrupt. Thanks for the heads-up system. Really appreciated the notification. I knelt on the floor, sword forgotten against the wall, and watched the last of the shell fall away. What climbed out was the most ridiculous thing I'd seen in 2 lifetimes. Small enough for both cupped hands, obsidian scales with faint ember veins, 2 stubby half-formed wings pressed damp against its sides, and enormous unfocused golden eyes blinking at nothing. It chirped indignantly, wobbled on unsteady legs, and face-planted into the cloth. I laughed before I could stop myself. A real laugh, the first that had come easily and longer than I wanted to admit. Species identified, data corrupted. Bond status, imprinting complete. 2 golden eyes fixed on me with the devotion of a creature that had decided for seconds after birth that I was the most important thing that ever existed. It pressed its warm head against my thumb and fell asleep, snoring too loud for a teacup-sized creature. I sat there along while watching it breathe, something in my chest loosening for the first time in weeks that had otherwise been grief, revelations, and the quiet dread of a bloodline 2 courts of creation still wanted erased. I named it Ember, watching one small vein along its scales pulse faintly gold in its sleep, like it approved, even half-conscious. Ember slept on, unbothered by heaven, hell, or anything else that might be searching for either of us. For the first time since bad news arrived carrying my family's oldest secret, I let myself be glad about something instead of afraid of it. The second half of the letter read differently. Where the confession had been halting and apologetic, this part was precise and deliberate, written by someone who'd had years alone to consider exactly what his grandson would need to hear. The grandfather warned, "Don't just confirm the unsealing the moment the system offers it." The bloodline required a trial, the rite of twin bloods, performed only in one place built to survive it. The Greyhold. Our first ancestor created it in the earliest years after the courts began hunting him. Every one of our blood who needed sanctuary since it found their way there eventually. The Greyhold belonged to neither heaven nor the abyss. A truth stated plainly in both courts' oldest treaties, so neither side had ever managed to justify erasing it outright, though both had probably wanted to more than once. It didn't appear on any map. It answered only to blood, carried by the correct key. I asked Dororo if he'd heard of it. He mentioned fragments, a monastery text decades ago, referencing a gray house between 2 silences where pilgrims vanished from their chasers. He dismissed it as poetic nonsense. He no longer thought it was. The bracelet was one fragment of the Greyhold's key, broken across generations the same way the bloodline itself had been. Find the remaining fragments, or find the gate and let it decide whether one fragment carried by strong enough blood was sufficient. Onbu. The guardian in the magic tower's 3rd floor had recognized the bracelet on sight, called it a fragment, the exact same word, without me ever using it first. He hadn't been talking about me. He'd been talking about this. Dororo said a guardian stationed inside a school's training tower, recognizing a relic tied to a sanctuary hidden from 2 courts of creation, was either an extraordinary coincidence or the family's secrets had considerably longer arms than either of us had appreciated. The grandfather wouldn't say if he'd be alive to greet me at the gate. Trust didn't survive absence for free, not even between blood. Earn it the slow way, the same way he would have earned mine had he been given the chance to watch me grow instead of hearing scraps, secondhand through careful allies, never once through a family who had no reason to know he was still anywhere at all. That line cracked something loose in my chest. He'd been listening for me, not through Mother, who'd carried the bracelet for years without answers, exactly as he'd intended, but through whatever thin threads a hiding man could maintain toward a mountain he'd vanished from rather than in danger. A grandfather I'd never met, piecing together a childhood he wasn't allowed to be part of, one second-hand scrap at a time. I set the page down before my hand could shake enough to tear it. Dororo said there was a name for what I was feeling. Nokure. 2 centuries, and it still didn't have one for him either. I asked what to do with this. Exactly what I'd already decided a week ago. Don't rush the seal. Don't rush the Greyhold either. Go home first. Find what was hollowing out the family from inside. The Greyhold had waited generations. It could wait until I wasn't walking into it, distracted by grief I hadn't finished sitting with. I reached for the bracelet. Now it didn't feel like an unexplained mystery. It felt like the first half of a door my grandfather had spent his whole life keeping closed, waiting for someone with enough blood and enough reason to knock properly. I told it soon, and tucked it back beneath my sleeve. Just not yet. Dororo said my grandfather, whoever he was, had written like someone who loved me more than he ever managed to say plainly. That was rarer than I'd think in letters written by men who expected never to be read. I couldn't trust my voice to answer, so I nodded and let the quiet hold the rest. Ember did not travel well. A small shriek announced that stuffing a newly hatched dragon into a satchel was a crime this hatchling intended to hold against me forever. It solved the problem by climbing on my shoulder and anchoring all 4 claws into my robe, deciding where it lived and not renegotiating. Dororo saw me off in the unmarked door, sunglasses in place despite the early hour and complete absence of glare. He told me not to die at home. He'd only just started finding me interesting. It would be enormously inconvenient to lose that after so little return on investment. He studied Ember for a long moment, something almost fond crossing his weathered face despite his effort to keep it off. A hatchling born from a dragon-slaying technique. There was a joke in there he was too tired to finish. He told me to write if the letter demanded more of his expertise, otherwise come back with my head still attached, and we'd finish the rest of what my grandfather left behind. For one uncharacteristic moment, the dry performance slipped. My family needed me whole more than the library needed me patient. Go be whole for them first. The rest would still be waiting. I bowed deeper than I usually allowed with him. He grunted something that might have been acknowledgement and turned back through his door. Elia found me at the gates. She asked if I'd hatched a dragon. Ember puffed out its chest and let out a self-important huff. His name was Ember. She reached out and scratched under its jaw when it leaned into her hand without hesitation. Traitor. She told me to be careful. She'd rather I came back complicated than not at all. Go save my family. Try to have fewer secrets by the time I got back. She was keeping a list. A long one. Growing daily. She was gone before I could ask how long it already was. The carriage ride out of the capital felt different than the one that had carried me in months ago. I watched the spires shrink with considerably more weight in my chest than curiosity this time. A bloodline 2 courts had spent centuries trying to erase. A hidden sanctuary with a grandfather who might or might not still be breathing. A mother 3 days ahead by road. Guarding walls someone patient and invisible had been quietly bleeding dry for years. Ember slept curled against my collar the entire first day, snoring with volume entirely disproportionate to its size. I watched the passing hills, turning my grandfather's letter over in my head. Earn it, the same slow way I would have earned yours. I didn't know what earning a dead man's trust looked like, but I had more urgent trust to earn first, from a mother who deserved to know what her son actually carried in his blood before some hidden voice told her a worse version of it first. On the second day, past the halfway point where the road narrowed between ridgelines thick with pine, I felt it. Brief, faint, gone almost before I registered it. A presence watching from off the road, careful enough that the divine gods I caught only a ghost before it slipped out of range. Not hostile, not yet, just patient. Ember stirred, one eye cracking open, nostrils flaring at something I couldn't smell. It let out a low, uncertain chirp and didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the afternoon. I kept one hand near my sword, watching the tree line without making it obvious. Whoever it was didn't approach that day or the next. But the feeling of being cataloged and filed away for later never fully left. By the third evening, the mountains of home were rising along the horizon, smaller than I remembered. I sat at the edge of the campfire's light, Ember curled in my lap, thinking less about the greyhold or the presence on the ridge and more about a smaller worry. What do I actually tell her? Mother had spent months believing the worst had already happened. She didn't yet know her son carried blood 2 quarts had spent centuries trying to erase. I turned that thought over and found no version that made the truth sit any lighter in her hands and in mine. Soon, I decided, not tonight. Now she was already carrying a sect bleeding out from inside. Some truths deserved to wait for a mother who wasn't already shouldering more than her share. I didn't sleep well that night, hand near my sword, watching the dark beyond the firelight. Whatever had been hollowing out my family's sect for years had finally noticed I was coming home to look for it. Good. Let notice. I was done being the only one caught unprepared. The mountain looked different than the one I'd left. Not ruined anymore. Scaffolding gone, replaced by new timber gone silver gray with the season's weather. Disciples moved through courtyards with ordinary purpose, finally stopped flinching at loud noises. Rebuilt mostly, recovered in the ways that showed. It didn't feel healed. It felt like a wound scarred over neatly while something underneath kept quietly refusing to set right. 3 weeks of recess. I intended to use every day, and already suspected 3 weeks might not be nearly enough. Mother was waiting at the gate before the carriage fully stopped. She had both arms around me before I'd cleared the door, tight enough that Ember squawked from where it had been dozing against my collar. She pulled back, staring. I said his name was Ember. Long story. Several long stories. She looked between the dragon and my face, something complicated crossing her expression. Then she pulled me back into the hug anyway. You've grown, she said. Not in height. Somewhere else. I looked like I was carrying something. Several somethings. Not yet. Not at the gate with disciples glancing our way. A bloodline, 2 quarts of creation, still hadn't decided whether to erase wasn't a conversation for open ground. I asked about the storehouse first. Her face closed slightly. This wasn't a gate conversation. Elder Finn met us in Mother's study, older than I remembered, gray threading further into his beard. I asked to see the storehouse and the eastern wall wards. He hesitated. The divine gods, I caught a flicker crossing his aura before he smoothed it back. Nerves, maybe. Guilt, maybe. Or the discomfort of an old man being asked to walk a 10-year-old through evidence of his own failure. I noticed his hand drift briefly to his sleeve. A small automatic gesture, the kind a man makes when checking something is still hidden. It registered and passed in the same breath. He said it was simple theft. Disciples steal. Happens in every sect. I said that it should be easy to prove once we look properly. Ember went unusually quiet as Elderfin let us out. No chirping, no restless shifting. Just a small watchful stillness I only half registered and would think back on harder in the days that followed. The eastern storehouse sat at the edge of rebuilt grounds. Nothing disturbed. A careful thief left nothing at all. I let the divine gods I unfold. Gold spreading through my vision until wood and stone thinned into structure. Every chi thread laid bare. Near the back wall, where missing spirit stones should have sat, a single thread ran differently. Thin, deliberate, not chi at all. Something colder, more precise, the exact texture of the thread I'd once traced through a mausoleum floor to find a lich's hidden heart. The same faint patient chill I'd felt twice on the road home, watching from a ridgeline I could never quite catch. I pointed it out. Elderfin said there was nothing there. I told him someone had been drawing directly through the wards instead of around them. Not theft. A channel, feeding on supplies, slowly, enough nobody caught it moving. Mother asked where it led. I didn't know yet, but it was thin and old enough that whoever built it had been doing this for years. That took real patience. The kind that doesn't panic just because an invasion already failed. Elder Fuan's composure slipped. I said whoever built this had to know exactly where the wards were weakest and which shipments wouldn't be missed quickly. That was someone who'd walked these halls long enough to know them better than most disciples living in them. He said he'd have every elder's movements reviewed. Discreetly. I said it was real. I'd seen exactly this kind of thread before, hidden behind exactly this kind of confidence nobody would think to look. I didn't say where. Didn't say an assassin standing behind my father's shadow, invisible to every elder, right up until the eyes of Apex tore the illusion apart. Some patterns simply repeated themselves, patient enough to wait years between attempts. 3 weeks to find the source of a channel patient enough to survive years unnoticed, understand what it wanted, and stop it before it noticed I was close enough to matter. I intended to prove its certainty wrong long before the clock ran out. I went back to the storehouse alone that night, a few hours before dawn. Elder Fun's review would take days, and days were exactly what a channel this patient didn't need me handing it for free. Whoever built it had survived years of nobody looking. A few more nights wouldn't cost them anything. It would cost me if I let the trail go cold waiting on someone else's paperwork. The divine gods, I found the thread again, thin and cold against the wall, threading through a finger-width gap in the stone and into the dark beyond. I followed it on foot, slow and careful. The thread didn't head toward the outer wall like I'd hoped. It curved back through the mountain, past rebuilt disciple quarters, past the medical hall, into older sections the invasion had bothered to leave alone. It ended at the ancestral hall. I stood at the doorway staring at portraits of dead masters, including the half-burned one with my grandfather's face and the mark I now understood way too well. I glanced at it anyway, because apparently I have a thing for looking at things that don't give me answers. Would the mark on his throat react? Nope. Stayed quiet. The thread ran past all the portraits and straight down through the floor into a space that absolutely should not have existed. I knelt, pressed my palm to the tile, felt for a sealed formation. The stone groaned and slid aside like a cabinet door in a horror movie I'd already seen. Narrow stairs. Dark. Smelled like old incense and whatever else old people hide in basements. I went down, because that's what I do when given the choice. The chamber was tiny, bare except for a low altar and half-burned candles for private ancestor worship. The thread ran to the altar center where a shallow bowl sat full of something dark and half-congealed. Blood. Not mine. Not my father's. Older. Layered. Whoever tended this altar had been doing it for years, not months. Way before the storehouse started losing stones. This guy had been running a side hustle right under everyone's nose. Then a voice from the stairwell. You weren't meant to find this so quickly. I turned. Elderfin stood at the base of the steps, the carefully put-together elder mask from that afternoon gone. He looked tired, resigned, and underneath both of those, something that looked a lot like relief. I said it was him. Hated how much those 3 words cost me. He said it was never meant to be forever. He loved the sect. He loved my father. But loyalty wasn't the same as power. When something old enough to remember when this mountain had a completely different name shows up and makes an offer an aging elder can't survive turning down. Well, his hands were shaking. There was a scarred line circling his wrist. Not a fashion statement. I asked who made the offer. My voice had gone very quiet and very still. He looked at the bowl of old blood between us, and something finally cracked open. He didn't know their real name. Nobody who made the bargain ever did. They called themselves the Choir. They showed up the season after my father died, when Elder Fun was grieving hard enough to promise basically anything for the chance to feel useful again. Classic. They never asked for gold, territory, or influence. They just asked small, patient questions about the family line, about what my grandfather might have left behind, about whether a kid born into this bloodline had ever shown anything unusual before I was even old enough to show them anything. They were asking about me before I was born. before my father was much older than I am right now. This was never really about territory. Whatever the MYTHIC sect thought it was serving was just theater, draped over something way older and more patient than any rival sect's greed. The choir had been listening to this mountain longer than either of us had been alive. I thought about my grandfather's letter, the bracelet. A bloodline two courts had spent centuries deciding whether to just wipe out. Whatever they were counting on, they'd started counting before anyone had a name for what they were watching for. I asked if they ever said what they expected to find. Nope. They never explained to the hands they used, only to people patient and powerful enough to matter directly. He was never more than a door they were fine, leaving quietly open. He thought they weren't counting days until the family's ambition became a threat worth crushing. They were counting days until whatever slept in my blood finally woke up loud enough for them to notice on its own. The candlelight flickered once, and the whole chamber felt like it was holding its breath. Elderfin's confession lasted longer than I expected, but not long enough. Nothing ever is. It happened partway through his answer about what they'd wanted in my blood. The cold thread I'd been tracing flared bright behind my eyes and surged toward the old man across from me. He was gasping before I even finished the warning, hands flying to his throat. Said too much. Always knew he would if anyone asked the right questions patiently enough. The system chimed in, hostile formation activating, bloodbound contract, threat level terminal. You know, the casual Tuesday kind of terminal. Whatever bargain he'd made wasn't built to survive being explained this clearly. It allowed the name, the grief, the regret. What did not allow was the plan getting laid out for someone else to act on. I caught him before he hit the stone. The eye showed me what I couldn't stop. 4-inch sheath threading through every vein, cold and patient, tightening like a fist closing around a straw. I told him to fight it. He said there was nothing left to fight. Made his peace the day he made the bargain. Just hoped he'd have longer before watching a kid's face while it happened. Told me to listen. Quickly. The choir operated through patience, bargains, small debts collected over years. They'd found him through grief after father's death, when he'd have promised anything to feel like he was still protecting something. Watch for grief in others. That was their favorite door. I asked who led them, where to find them. He didn't know where. Only ever met their voice, never their face. But they were close. Closer than I thought. Wouldn't have moved this fast otherwise. He told me to tell Mother he was sorry. Never stopped being sorry. Every season pouring offerings into that bowl, instead of finding the guts to confess. Told me to tell the sect an old fool loved it to the end. Even the parts he'd quietly betrayed. Let them be angry. Remember that part too. The thread pulled taut. Whatever was holding them together just stopped. I held an old man's body in a hidden chamber beneath the ancestral hall, candles guttering around a bowl of blood that had finally stopped receiving offerings. Close. Closer than you think. Mother met me at the stairs. Went still at what I was carrying. Because of course she did, the woman misses nothing. I told her he'd been hollowing the sect from inside. A bargain after father died. The choir found him through grief. He held together long enough to warn me. Then they decided he'd said enough. Her hand went to her mouth. She said he'd love this sect. Never doubted that. I said neither did I. That's what made it worse. She knelt beside him, smooth hair gone gray. Shoulders shook once before she got them under control. I gave her his last words. She closed her eyes. Said she forgave him. Whatever good that did him now. We stood there a while. An old man's debt paid in full. Somewhere beyond the mountain, something patient enough to wait years had just learned its channel into our walls was found. Mother stayed with the body. I climbed to the ancestral hall alone, stood under my grandfather's half-burned portrait. Asked if he'd known, not the choir by name, but something patient enough to survive generations. I got why he never came back. Wasn't sure I forgave him yet, but I got it. Ember pressed its head against my jaw. 3 weeks left on my recess. Fewer now, since one had been spent uncovering a mole instead of the source behind him. A choir patient enough to wait years and impatient enough to kill within minutes of being named. Whatever came next wasn't going to give me time to grieve properly first. Closer than you think. Fine. Let's stop pretending either of us had time to sit around waiting politely. I was going to find out how close before they proved it themselves. The sect went quiet after that. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The tense kind. The kind where everyone's learned that safety was always a group project nobody actually finished. Mother and I sat in her study that night, lamp burning low, Ember on alert against my collar. She said we should search Fun's quarters. I said I already had. Nothing. Whoever he dealt with never left evidence. She said I made it sound like an army. I said worse. An army you can see coming. This thing wanted to decide whether I was allowed to exist, and was patient enough that losing this attempt wouldn't even inconvenience it. We sat with the silence. Two people who'd buried enough to know what silence costs. I told her to sleep. She said she could say the same to me. Studied me over the lamplight. Said I'd barely stopped moving. A duel, a tower, an assassin, and now this, and I still hadn't told her half of what happened at the academy. I said soon. Promised. Just not tonight. Not with an elder's body cooling 2 floors down. She let it go, though the look promised a conversation I was definitely going to lose later. A week passed before anything happened. Fun's memorial took 3 days. I spent the rest reinforcing wards, drilling cosmic wave, and watching Mother slowly stop flinching at every creaking door. I felt the presence again, just past midnight on the 8th night. Same watcher I'd sensed on the road. Except this time, it didn't retreat. This time, it wanted to be noticed. I told Mother to stay. She started to argue. I said if something went down, I needed her safe behind these walls. She didn't argue, but the look promised a conversation I was definitely going to lose later. Ember launched off my shoulder, chirping low and sharp. Not fear. Warning. Good bird. The eye caught the figure at the edge of the training grounds. Tall. Robed in something that drank light. Hood that moved wrong in the wind. The system tried to identify it. Got. Choir attendant. Cultivation. Unable to determine. Threat. Unable to determine. The eye had never just flat out failed to answer before. I said they were a long way from the road. Come to finish what they started? The voice came from everywhere at once. Layered. Dozens of tones in perfect unison, like a choir that actually rehearsed. They'd come to see whether the boy who broke their patience was worth the debt his elder cost them. I said your elder. Not mine. He was mine until you spent years turning grief into a leash. Grief was simply the door people left open, the choir said. They didn't build his sorrow. They only noticed it like water settling into the lowest point. I said touching philosophy. Didn't change they were standing on my family's mountain. They were aware. They'd been aware considerably longer than I'd been alive to resent it. Child of the bloodline, neither heaven nor the abyss ever agreed to let live in peace. My grip tightened on the sword. They knew what slept in my blood. Always had. That's why my family's decline was never just simple ambition. They needed my sect weakened, contained, until they figured out whether the sealed inheritance inside me was worth waking up or worth erasing before it had the chance. I asked which it was now. Silence. Then, undecided. I'd made the decision harder than they expected. That wasn't in my favor. Difficulty only earned more time to be watched more closely. I said then watch closely. I didn't intend to make it easier. Ember dove, wings tucked, claws bared, straight at the figure's head. The attendant simply wasn't there anymore. No motion, no retreat, just absence. Voice trailing back from beyond the grounds. They'd return when they'd decided. Guard my mountain if it comforted me. It had never stopped them from watching whatever they chose. Then even the voice was gone. Just firelight, my breathing, and a furious dragon circling before settling on my shoulder, wings trembling with anger too big for its body. I stood there, sword drawn, staring at darkness that had just casually informed me my bloodline's survival hinged on a decision I wasn't even in the room to argue. Undecided. Fine. Undecided meant time. 2 weeks before the academy expected me back, and this mountain would face the choir without me. 2 weeks to become harder to erase, or find some way to force their hand. I sheathed my sword, turned back toward the mountain, said I intended to make that decision as difficult as I possibly could. Meant every word. I didn't tell Mother what I was planning that night. Told myself it was to spare her the argument. The honest part of me suspected I wasn't sure I'd win it. The chamber beneath the ancestral hall looked exactly like we'd left it, candles down to stubs, the bowl dry. I knelt the waif and must have. Let the eye trace what remained of the channel. Cold, patient, silent. Fine. Let's not properly this time. I asked the system, if I offered blood here without accepting anything, did that count as a bargain? Formation, passive contact channel. Bargain status, requires mutual acceptance. Offering, voluntary, no terms. Risk, unknown recipient response. Unknown, not terminal, the way it had been for fun. I hesitated. Ember watched from the altar's edge, golden eyes narrowed in disapproval for a creature barely a month old. I told it I knew. Reckless. Duly noted. Cut my palm, pressed it against the dry bowl. I'm not offering anything, I thought down the channel. I'm telling you where to find me. Since you're determined to watch from a distance, instead of finishing the conversation you started in my courtyard. Nothing happened. Long enough to compose exactly how stupid this would sound if Mother found out. Then the candles went out. All at once. No wind. Bold, said a voice from the dark. Not the layered chorus, but a single tone across too many throats. Foolish. Also effective. Few in my family's history thought to use their listening post to summon them. I said I didn't have their patience. They'd said, undecided. I want to know what would move the needle. Direct. Since I'd asked properly, they'd answer. They didn't decide worth through words. Words were cheap. The dark thickened into a shape, taller than the attendant. Features unreadable, but something about it felt less like an emissary and more like whatever had sent it. They decided worth through pressure. Show them what surfaced when there was no room to perform courage. The pressure hit. Not chi, not anything the eye could categorize. Something pressing against what kept a soul anchored, cold and absolute, like a hand closing around a candle flame. I dropped to one knee. Ember shrieked, claws raking through mist that gave no more grip than smoke. Cosmic wave, I thought. Move. Circulate. Chi answered, thin and strained. Wasn't enough. This pressure sat outside what cosmic wave was built to handle. Something else answered. From lower than my dantian, older than any technique across 2 lifetimes. Warmth with nothing to do with chi and everything to do with the bracelet. Except it wasn't quiet anymore. Heat spread up my arm, and for one heartbeat, something in my chest answered the pressure instead of just taking it. Instinct reaching for a door my grandfather kept shut, finding it unlocked enough to breathe through. The mist recoiled. Not far, not permanently, but enough to ease the weight, drag one breath back, plant my sword tip, and force myself upright. There, the voice said. Almost satisfaction. There it is. I stood shaking, glaring into darkness that had just watched something ancient stir awake in me without my permission. Said that wasn't the seal breaking. That was instinct. They hadn't seen anything yet. No, they agreed. And that was why undecided hadn't become a verdict. The mist withdrew, pressure lifting. I'd shown an instinct answering a threat it was never taught to answer. Rarer and more interesting than a bloodline surviving by hiding. I said then decide. Properly. Done being watched while my family bled. Soon the voice said, heavier than when I'd used it myself. I'd earned a true verdict. Prepare my mountain. They'd return and wouldn't come alone next time. Mist folded into nothing. Candles flared back, like they'd been politely waiting for the conversation to end. I stood alone, sword lowered, bracelet cooling back to ordinary weight. Ember landed on my shoulder, pressed hard against my jaw, refusing to be shaken. I repeated the words. We will not come alone next time. Fine. Whatever verdict was coming, it wasn't arriving on the choir's schedule. It was arriving on a deadline I'd forced. I'd spend every remaining day making sure my mountain was ready to answer standing, not kneeling. I climbed to the ancestral hall, stopped under my grandfather's portrait, said he never got to choose when his verdict arrived either. Sorry for that. Understood now how little choice either of us had in when this came due. The portrait offered nothing. I just needed for one unsteady moment to say it out loud to someone who might have understood. Before carrying the weight back to a mother who deserved better than finding out secondhand what her son had risked in a room full of cold candles and older blood than either of us had asked to carry. 5 days passed before they came back. I spent every one training until Cosmic Wave felt like breathing walking the eastern wall with Elder Shu, reinforcing weak points, and sitting with Mother each evening and putting off the conversation I owed her. On the fifth night, I stopped putting it off. Told her about the bloodline, the vault, the letter, the warden and the duke neither court had forgiven for loving each other, the greyhold with a grandfather who might still be inside it, the choir's verdict hanging over us. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she sat very still, and I braced. She said Father used to tell her, I had his eyes, but none of his fear. Always assumed he meant swords. Didn't think he did. Thought some part of him always knew there was more behind my birth, and he chose to love me anyway. I asked if she was afraid. She said terrified. Didn't change how much she loved me. A bloodline neither heaven nor the abyss could agree on wasn't going to change that. I reached across and let her hold my hand instead. The choir arrived the following night. The entire mountain felt it. Every ward flared. Disciples spilled out, staring at a sky gone the wrong color. 5 figures this time, around the same voice I'd summoned. They said they promised not to come alone. Kept their word. Mother's hand closed around my arm. I told her to stay behind me. She didn't argue. Ember launched off my shoulder. I caught it before it threw itself at something way beyond its weight class. Not this time. Not alone. The choir had reached their verdict. I said then, say it. My bloodline wasn't worth erasing on its own. Dilution had done what my family hoped. What slept in me was real but thin. Thin things rarely justified hunting costs. Something eased before the voice continued. What was worth the trouble was what I'd shown twice. An instinct answering pressure was never taught to answer in a body not yet finished growing. That wasn't dilution. That was a bloodline reasserting itself in a vessel more capable than those before. They were less certain thin would remain the correct word. I asked if they'd erase me now before I finished growing. They considered it. Came prepared. A new presence arrived. Vast, familiar. The sky bending. The Vortexian patriarch descended in the flesh. Said it was fortunate the verdict hadn't leaned that direction. More fortunate they'd arrived before they finished deciding otherwise. The 5 went still. Divine realm, the voice observed. You involve yourself directly? The patriarch said he'd made a promise to a dead friend his line wouldn't end while he drew breath. Intended to keep it loudly, if that's what tonight required. He stood beside me, not in front, letting me stand as the one being judged. They'd had their look, their patience, their verdict. He'd suggest delivering the rest without testing whether a divine realm elder, in their way, changed their math. The choir conferred soundlessly, then said the verdict stood. My bloodline lived, on condition it proved itself worth the exception. Seek the trial my blood was built to require, at the place it was built to find. Within time, they didn't tire of waiting. Complete it, demonstrate control rather than mere instinct, and the matter closed. Fail, and they wouldn't require a second summons. I said the right of twin bloods. At the Greyhold. They said I already knew the shape of my inheritance. Good. One further matter. I wasn't the only interested party. The Nightski sex ambitions were never entirely their own design. Watch my kingdom as closely as I watched them. Mortal greed rarely waited for older verdicts. Then the 5 folded into dark, and the sky corrected itself, night flooding back like something exhaling. The patriarch stayed only for tea. Said I need to find the Greyhold's gate myself. Few knew where it lay. He studied me. Said Father would have been unbearably proud tonight. I thanked him for coming. He said he'd made a promise. At the gate, paused. Finish my recess. Return to the academy. Grow stronger before looking for that gate. A right this old wouldn't care how brave I felt walking and unprepared. Then he was gone. The mountains settled into something almost resembling quiet. Mother found me still standing in the training ground, Ember exhausted against my collar. She said 2 years. That's what they'd given me. I said I'd heard it the same way. She said then we'd better make sure 2 years was enough. Smoothed my hair back. Said whatever I was, whatever slept in my blood, I was still her son first. That was never up for their verdict. I leaned into that just for a moment before the weight ahead settled back. 2 years. A Greyhold defined. A right my grandfather never lived to describe. A Nightski sect still watching, and mortal ambition that hadn't waited for anyone's verdict. Less time and it sounded. More reason to spend every hour well.